Chapter 275, Wedding Date. Amid the hush of countless elves, Gandalf opened the small box in his hand. Inside lay a black gem the size of a finger. The elves craned their necks, curiosity written on every face. "This is the resurrection stone," Gandalf said. "It can summon the souls of the dead." Murmurs swept through the assembly. Many looked at the obsidian-like stone with disbelief. Those who had lost loved ones stared at it with longing. Then Duir opened the second box in his hand. Inside lay the Philosopher's Stone. Gandalf explained its powers as well. When he said it could grant eternal life, the elves, already immortal, were not as surprised as they were by the stone's ability to transmute matter into gold. Still, it was plainly a treasure beyond price. Duir had presented 3 supreme artifacts as betrothal gifts at once. The elves were astonished. Even Elrond, seldom taken by surprise, showed a rare expression of wonder. Duir had mentioned the Philosopher's Stone in Isengard before, so that one had been expected, but the Golden Cup and the Resurrection Stone as betrothal gifts were unexpected. Elrond was astonished, and more importantly, immensely pleased. That Duir could offer such treasures showed how dearly he held Arwen, and as a father, Elrond could not help but be glad. Even the twins, Elladan and Elrohir, changed their tune. Their earlier reservations melted into heartfelt blessings. Elrond rose, a gentle smile on his face, and nodded. "I consent to your marriage." Duir's joy overflowed. Gandalf clapped his hands, beaming at the grinning Duir with relief and blessing. Bilbo clapped too, his face flushed with excitement as though it were his own wedding. The elves applauded and offered their good wishes. Gandalf, acting as proxy and elder, then began discussing and negotiating dates with Elrond. Duir was gently led out of the banquet hall by his future brothers-in-law, one on each arm. He felt a little flustered. Did they mean to beat him for taking their sister? Should he resist and risk offending them, or submit and hope for mercy? The twins apparently read his thoughts. "Stop worrying," Elladan said. "We didn't bring you out here to teach you a lesson." "We brought you to meet someone," Elrohir added. "Who?" Duir asked. "You'll see," they said, and led him deeper into the forested heart of Rivendell. They emerged into a meadow thick with flowers, the golden Eleanor of Lothlorien and the white Nifredil among them. In the center stood a life-sized marble statue, carved with a gentle, beautiful smile. There was a faint likeness to Arwen. Beneath it, Arwen herself sat weaving a crown of flowers. She looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps and smiled when she saw Duir and the twins. For a moment, she seemed to blend with the statue. "You've come," she said softly. The twins gave Duir a light shove and left without another word. Duir had not seen Arwen during the banquet and had not expected to find her here. He crossed the meadow and stood beside her. Arwen placed the wreath on the statue, her eyes clouding with memory. "That is my mother," she said. "Celebrian. After she left, Father carved this statue himself. On her birthday or the day she left, he comes here and stays, sits and looks toward the west." Duir took her hand gently. "Your father loved her very much." "I know," Arwen replied, staring at the stone as if it would answer. "Sometimes I wonder if I will ever see her again." "You will," Duir said with conviction. "Once the strife in Middle-earth ends, we can take a ship to the west and find Celebrian." He knew that with Sauron's defeat and the dawning age of men, many elves would pass into the west. Since Arwen had not chosen to forsake her immortality, she would be eligible to go to the Undying Lands, if the Valar permitted it. But Duir could not go to Valinor without that same favor. Only a few mortals had ever been granted such a blessing. Tuor, father of Erendil, who sailed with Idril to the west and was granted immortality by the Valar, and Erendil himself, who was half-elven. Arwen looked at Duir, worry shadowing her face. If he could not go, would she give up the chance to sail west to remain with him? Duir read the fear in her eyes and squeezed her hand. He was not anxious. He had seen how, after the War of the Ring, Frodo, Bilbo, Sam, and even Gimli the dwarf were permitted to go west. He reasoned there was no reason he could not one day receive the same grace. If necessary, he would serve in the coming struggle and earn his place. Seeing her still troubled, he lifted her chin so she would meet his gaze. Tenderness and resolve steadied his voice. "Don't worry. Trust me. Lord Elrond has consented to our marriage. Aren't you happy?" Arwen smiled, all tenderness. "Very happy." "Then come on. Let's hurry back to the hall. If we're not there, I'm afraid Father might postpone the wedding for decades just to keep you a little longer, and I'll die of impatience." She let him take her hand, and they ran, laughter and relief on her face. When they returned, Gandalf and Elrond had finished setting the dates. The engagement would be at the Harvest Festival, 3 months hence, September 21st. The wedding itself would be a year later, on September 21st, 2948. "That long?" Duir blurted. Gandalf waved a hand, half exasperated, half amused. "You should thank me. If I had not argued so strongly, Lord Elrond might have wanted to postpone it for several more years. You'd be pacing the halls until you were gray." Well, that timing is fine then," Duir said quickly, fearing a change of heart. Bilbo watched, chuckling. Gandalf, who could not resist matchmaking, turned to him. "Bilbo, you're not young. Is there anyone in the Shire you fancy? I could act as your proxy and see you married." Bilbo squawked in surprise and shook his head hard. No, Gandalf. I'm happy as I am, thank you." "You should be careful," Gandalf said wryly. "If you die without an heir, your treasures will go to distant relatives." Bilbo's face tightened at the thought of Utho Sackville Baggins and his wife Lobelia, covetous neighbors who had eyed Bag End in the past. The idea of leaving his possessions to them made him shudder. Duir, noting Bilbo was 57, hobbits live long, but not that long without special aid, resolved privately to give Bilbo an elixir of longevity for his next birthday. Bilbo's birthday was September 22nd, conveniently the day after Duir's engagement. A birthday feast at Weathertop could be arranged as a surprise. With the dates set, Duir and Arwen announced their betrothal to the gathered folk. Duir used the golden cup to conjure a sumptuous feast, and the hall erupted in celebration. News of the golden cup spread quickly, from the Elves to the Dunedain and across the races of Middle-earth, along with stories of the Resurrection Stone and the Philosopher's Stone. Rumors grew wilder with each retelling. The cup could bring the dead back, the stone could grant eternal life, the Philosopher's Stone could conjure mountains of gold. People marveled at Duir's devotion and at the treasures themselves. Greed followed curiosity. A few tried to sneak into Weathertop and steal one of the 3 artifacts: the cup to command the world, the Resurrection Stone to restore lost loved ones, the Philosopher's Stone to gain immortality. All attempts failed. None could breach the defenses. No one could cross the black lake that ringed Weathertop, and those who tried were swallowed by the waters and made food for the great kraken that guarded the place. Chapter 276, Invitation Letter. The Lord is getting engaged. The news spread from Weathertop's Hogwarts Castle down through Hogsmeade and Bree at the mountain's base. The townsfolk burst into the sort of excitement usually reserved for New Year's. For Duir's subjects, this was long awaited. Only when their lord married and produced an heir would Hogwarts have a clear successor, and Hogsmeade and Bree could hope for lasting peace and stability. Lanterns and festive decorations went up. Shops ran special sales. Word of the engagement even reached Eriador via traveling merchants and adventurers. While the people at the foot of the mountain made merry, Hogwarts itself remained serene. After returning from Rivendell, Duir set about writing invitation letters. By custom, the engagement would be held at the bride's family home, and Duir would attend with friends and allies. Gandalf and Bilbo were indispensable, of course. So were Legolas, the elf prince of the Woodland Realm, Balin, Lord of Moria, Beorn the Skin Changer of the Anduin Valley, Bard, Lord of Dale, and a long list of others who must not be overlooked: Thorin Oakenshield, King of Erebor, Dain Ironfoot of the Iron Hills, Calanmir, an elf lord from the Far East, the 2 blue wizards Ramastamo and Morinitar, and Radagast the Brown. Invitations were sent to them all. Gandalf and Bilbo stayed at Hogwarts to help Duir. The great snowy owls from the Owl Tower entered a busy season, carrying letters to every corner of Middle-earth. Besides correspondence, Duir worked with Gandalf designing the Thunderbird's magical circulation system. Gandalf was fascinated by the idea of a Thunderbird, an enormous magical bird that could control storms, bring rain, and discharge lightning. He said such a creature would surely be favored by Manwë, king of the Valar. From a certain perspective, the Thunderbird's mastery of weather made it more fitting as Manwë's messenger than the great eagles. Having already sketched the Phoenix's magic system, Duir and Gandalf had a foundation to build from, but the Thunderbird proved different in crucial ways. Gandalf, as bearer of Narya, had deep knowledge of fire and a natural affinity for the phoenix. Lightning, however, was less familiar. In the Transfiguration classroom, Duir set to work on a test subject, an acromantula. Under Transfiguration, the acromantula took on the outward shape of a thunderbird, eagle-like head, 2 pairs of wings, long tail feathers, but Duir still had to reconfigure its internal magical circulation. Midway through the process, the new circulation destabilized violently. The acromantula hissed in pain. There was a bang, a flash of lightning, and the creature exploded into smithereens. Duir cast a shield charm in time to protect himself and Gandalf from the blast's aftershocks. Duir did not despair. He and Gandalf adjusted the circulation paths and tried again. Each experiment ended in disaster. The subjects were either blown apart or twisted into grotesques, feathered spiders, bird-like beasts with spidery legs, or eagle-headed spiders ringed with extra eyes. Duir waved his hand and sent those malformed creatures down to Herpo's Chamber of Secrets as food, then fetched another acromantula and started over. Acromantulas bred prolifically. Each could lay hundreds of eggs, so Duir had plenty of test subjects. He had already expanded their housing with multiple undetectable extension charms, yet the numbers still grew. He felt no guilt in using them for experiments. Days passed. Finally, Duir managed a successful transformation. An acromantula truly became, a thunderbird. This was more than a surface change. The creature resisted counter-transfiguration and could emit faint electric sparks. Still, Duir was not satisfied. The bird's electricity was weak. It could be easily blocked by the most basic shield charm. It was far from the storm-calling thunderbird he imagined. "Don't be discouraged, Duir," Gandalf said. "We had no reference for this. Getting a creature to discharge electricity in a few months is impressive. Such work requires luck and inspiration. We have plenty of time, no need to rush." At Gandalf's words, Duir's frown eased. "Luck and inspiration," he repeated, and a smile came to his face. "Once the Felix Felicis is brewed, we'll try again. A dose of luck should help." Gandalf chuckled. "I'm curious to see the Felix Felicis you're making. Luck that can be bottled. That's rarer than most magic. When it's done, I'll send you a bottle," Duir promised. For the moment, they set the Thunderbird experiments aside and turned to final preparations for the engagement. Replies to Duir's invitations trickled in. Legolas, Bard, Beorn, and Balin accepted gladly. Thorin and Thengel of Rohan were tied up with state affairs and would send representatives, though both vowed to attend the wedding itself. The 2 blue wizards in the Far East couldn't come because of unrest among the Easterling tribes. Círdan at the Grey Havens was busy ferrying elves west and couldn't attend, but he sent a box of pearls formed from merfolk tears as his blessing. On September 20th, the day before the Harvest Festival and the engagement, guests arrived through the fireplaces at Hogwarts. Luke, mayor of Hogsmeade, Lecce, mayor of Bree, Brog, leader of the Dunlendings, and several citizen representatives arrived at Weathertop. The castle buzzed with life. Humans, elves, dwarves, and hobbits filled the great hall. The original expedition to Erebor reunited, Thorin absent. Keeley came with Toriel, the she-elf he had married. Since leaving Erebor, they had traveled, lately staying in the Blue Mountains. Legolas, who treated Toriel like family, was especially pleased to see her happy. Many of the dwarves in the expedition had not seen one another for years. Balin now dwelt in Moria with Oin, Ori, and Bifur, so the reunion was joyful. They embraced old friends Bilbo, Gandalf, and Duir, and presented Duir with overflowing gifts, piles of gold, silver, and jewels. Balin, as Lord of Moria, gave a magnificent suit of armor crafted from mithril. Guests toured Hogwarts in astonishment. The ever-burning Guldur fire, candles that floated in midair, a ceiling mirroring the sky outside, moving staircases, a miniature herb garden, fire salamanders in the hearth, and portraits that talked, moved, and bore their own tempers and habits. Everyone lingered before the magical portraits, trying to converse. Yet the garden was the sight that most stunned them. The golden Maolong tree and the silvery holy white tree, drenched in setting sun, shed dazzling light over the castle. A sweet breeze carried their fragrance everywhere. The guests were reluctant to leave such splendor. The next morning, they dressed in their finest and gathered by the fountain in front of the banquet hall. excitement on every face. When 12 tall white winged horses drew up pulling a gilded carriage, everyone gasped at the sight. Even the dwarves admitted the winged horses were beautiful. "All right, everyone, climb aboard. We mustn't make our hosts wait," Gandalf called, stepping forward in a white robe that made him look almost like the white wizard he would one day become. They tidied their cloaks and lined up to enter. Present were 12 dwarves, including Balin, Fili, and Kili, Legolas and Toriel, the hobbits Bilbo and Drogo Baggins, Frodo's father, Beorn the Skin Changer, Bard and his son, Brog, Luke and Litchi, Gandalf, and Duir, 23 in all, and with the 2 coachmen, 25. "Only one carriage? Isn't it going to be cramped?" Bomber grumbled as he stared at the carriage and then at his rotund self. He clambered in and froze. The interior was enormous, so vast that their 23 people fit with ease, and it would have comfortably held 10 times that number. Chapter 277, Got Engaged. The carriage was immense. Its thick wooden floor was neatly arranged with sofas and tables, and a fireplace burned warmly at one end. A huge crystal chandelier hung inverted from the high ceiling. The ceiling and sides of the coach were transparent, giving everyone a clear view of the world outside. Most of the passengers sat or stood, peering about with curiosity. Only Bilbo and Gandalf seemed composed, as if they had traveled in such a carriage before. Dewey wore the crown of wisdom and a white, form-fitting elven robe. A dragon-skin belt studded with blue gems cinched his waist. His dragon-skin boots and tasteful accessories completed the outfit. Gandalf and Bilbo, among others, had chosen the attire to make him the most dazzling figure of the day. Dewey sat upright in the principal seat, outwardly calm, but his gaze was distant. Their conversation and the pomp had long since slipped his mind. The others tacitly left him be. When everyone was ready, Gandalf called, "Depart!" and the carriage began to move. To everyone's astonishment, there was no jostle inside. Not a ripple disturbed the drinks on the table. 12 winged horses pulled the coach, then spread their great wings and took flight. As the carriage gained speed, its wheels slowly left the ground, and it soared above the castle walls and into the sky. The carriage, climbing higher, left the onlookers below, breathless and thrilled. "What's that?" Kili, who had been staring out the window, suddenly pointed. 2 rows of fully armed riders on 12 hippogriffs were chasing the carriage. Brog, leader of the Black Barbarians and proudly aboard, explained, "Those are hippogriffs bestowed upon us by Lord Duir. Since his lordship is going to Rivendell for his engagement, we naturally must show our support." Everyone looked on with envy and admiration. The hippogriffs were magnificent and formidable mounts. Who wouldn't want one? Dewey himself was surprised. He had not been told beforehand. Looking at Gandalf's serene expression and Bilbo's more composed air, he understood. This, too, was their surprise for him. Gandalf noticed Dewey's glance and chuckled. "Today is your engagement. Rivendell will be full of elves. We must be grand and not shame your name." Gandalf grinned a little ruefully. "When Bilbo and I were planning, we thought of waking Smaug from your cellar to join Thorondor the giant eagle. Then we reconsidered. Bringing a dragon might frighten everyone more than surprise them, so we dropped the idea." He sounded mildly disappointed. Dewey glanced at Bilbo, who looked slightly embarrassed, and then at Gandalf, and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This was an engagement, not a raid. Such excesses were unnecessary, but he appreciated the thought. Down in Hogsmeade, below the mountain, residents watched the spectacle as the winged horses carried the golden carriage away from Hogwarts Castle, hippogriffs in pursuit. Their eyes widened, and they cheered. They knew their lord was going to the ladies' home for the engagement. Though they couldn't witness the ceremony, they already looked forward to the wedding a year hence, which by custom would be held at the groom's residence and be even livelier. Traveling merchants, bards, and visitors also stared up in awe. A quick sketch painter captured the carriage as it flew away. That painting would later pass through many hands and become a famous relic, long after the elves themselves had vanished from the continent. The carriage sped east through the clouds. Inside, passengers pressed noses to the transparent walls, marveling at clouds close enough to touch and the tiny buildings far below. Balin glanced down and quickly declared he could not bear it. He lay back to avoid looking. The coach traced the east-west road, crossed desolate lands, skimmed the clear spring river, cut through the trollshaws, and came at last over the Bruinen. "We're almost at Rivendell. Straighten yourselves. Be presentable. Don't bring shame," Gandalf called, taking in the scenery beneath them. Immediately the dwarves straightened up, fussing in a flurry. "Bomber, stop eating. There's crumbs in your beard. Bofer, lift your hoof. My new shoes." Feely teased Killy with a mischievous twinkle. "Killy, remember last time we passed Rivendell? You took a liking to an elf. Any plans this time?" Killy turned, flustered, and looked toward Toriel. "Toriel, believe me, I didn't. Feely's making stuff up." The dwarves whooped. "He said that elf was good-looking. He even winked." Killy, reddening, blurted, "The elf was a male. Really?" Toriel gave him a bemused look, and the hall broke into laughter. The mood lightened and grew jovial. Beyond the Bruinen lay Rivendell. At the coachman's command, the winged horses descended into the valley and skimmed toward the White Avenue. Elven sentries sounded their horns. Rivendell was alive with activity. Not only its own people, but elves from Lothlorien, Lindon, the Woodland Realm, even Dorwinion in the Far East had gathered. Elrond's status among the elves was such that many had come to offer their congratulations. Melodious elven songs about Luthien and Beren drifted through the air as fresh flowers and soft vines were woven into decorations. Lanterns glittered like stars along the cliffs, and even the waterfalls seemed to sing in the magic of the night. 12 white-winged horses skimmed low over the river, folded their wings, and landed as if walking on water. The carriage followed, its golden wheels leaving tracks on the approach to the stone bridge that led to the last homely house. A coachman lowered a wooden ladder, and one by one the guests stepped down. Gandalf disembarked first and greeted Lindir with a smile. Next came Bard, Lord of Dale, Balin, Lord of Moria, the rest of the dwarves, Toriel, Legolas, and others. Dewey was the last to step from the carriage. "Lindir, it's been too long," Dewey said with a smile. Lindir inclined his head in respect and gestured, "Please, this way." The winged horses, the hippogriffs, and the black barbarian warriors were left in orderly ranks as the procession moved toward the banquet hall. The hall was full of elves. At its head sat Elrond, and beside him Galadriel and Celeborn. Even the reclusive Glorfindel had come. Arwen wore a delicate butterfly crown of mithril set with sparkling gems, 3 strings of white bead tassels hanging by her ears. In a graceful white elven gown, she leaned against her grandmother Galadriel. When she saw Dewey enter, her face brightened with a radiant smile that made her seem almost to glow. Dewey caught her at once and could scarcely take his eyes off her. Under the new moon and a sky of stars in the gardens of the last homely house, the star of Arundel shone especially bright, as if lending its blessing. The assembled elves and guests lined the garden paths, flowers framing the couple. Maidens sang the tale of Luthien and Beren, while musicians played haunting, lovely melodies. Before all of them, Dewey took from his robe a silver ring he had crafted himself and slipped it onto Arwen's hand. Arwen produced a sparkling silver ring in return and placed it on Dewey's finger. When Gandalf pronounced them betrothed, Dewey drew Arwen close and kissed her, impatient and tender. Applause broke out. The dwarves, who had been trying to keep decorum, abandoned restraint and erupted into loud cheers and raucous dwarven blessing songs. Their voices temporarily drowned out the elven maidens and the harps, but no one minded. Smiles and approving chuckles greeted their enthusiasm. Starlight glimmered. Music and song continued into the night, and a joyful atmosphere settled over Rivendell that lingered long after the celebration. Chapter 278. Thunderbird Birth Time Flew. More than 2 months had passed since the engagement, and the year was drawing to a close. After the betrothal, Dewey and Arwen had confirmed their relationship. They were not yet married, but they could be together openly. Dewey felt a twinge of regret that he could not make Arwen his wife yet, but he took comfort in the small freedoms their status afforded, holding his fiancée's hand in public, going on unrestrained dates. For a while after the engagement, the two were inseparable, leaving footprints across Rivendell, Lothlorien, and Weathertop. Fishermen at Hogsmeade, on the far side of the lake beneath Weathertop, sometimes caught sight of their lord strolling along the water with a radiant elven maiden or teasing the white Arrau cattle. During this time, Dewey also held a grand birthday banquet for Bilbo at Hogwarts Castle, gifting the old hobbit a bottle of elixir of life. He spent those months in a rare leisure until at last the long-brewing Felix Felicis was ready and everything else receded into the background. When the amber flask was finally uncorked, the golden liquid inside glittered with beads of light. After more than half a year of careful brewing, it had succeeded. Dewey decanted it into 3 small amber vials. Felix Felicis was potent. A small, full vial contained 3 or 4 sips and could provide about 12 hours of fortunate luck. 1 sip yielded roughly 3 to 4 hours. It was miraculous, but dangerous in excess. Overdosing could bring dizziness, recklessness, or severe toxicity. Even Potion Master Slughorn admitted to taking it only 3 times in his life, at 24, at 57, and once during the Battle of Hogwarts when it had preserved him. Dewey kept 1 full vial for himself. He split the other 2 vials into 4 half vials, each worth about 6 hours of luck, and distributed them as thanks and precaution. 1 to Glorfindel for the 10 drops of elven blood that had helped his brew, 1 to Gandalf for his steady assistance, and the remaining 2 to Arwen and Elrond. None of them took the potion lightly. Felix Felicis could be decisive at a critical moment, so they carried their portions like talismans. Dewey was eager to try its effects. Most of all, he wanted to push forward with his long-cherished work on animagus transformation and the Thunderbird project. To be safe, he decided his first use of Felix Felicis would not be for a reckless personal experiment, but to design the Thunderbird's internal magic circulation system, the very bottleneck that had stalled their research. Since the engagement, Gandalf had stayed in Rivendell. Dewey showed him and gave out the vials. Gandalf, Glorfindel, Elrond, and Arwen were all curious but cautious. They gathered on the broad platform of a great tree on Weathertop. Arwen stood close by while Dewey and Gandalf prepared. "What do you intend to do?" Gandalf asked. Dewey produced one of the half vials, face resolute. "I'm going to take Felix Felicis and, while I'm fortunate, complete the Thunderbird's magical reconfiguration. Time is limited, and we can't risk repeated trials on test subjects. I plan to perform a direct transformation on Thorondor and aim for success the first time." Gandalf's expression hardened. "There is great risk. If luck does not carry you through, a failed magical transformation could mean madness at best or instantaneous death at worst." Dew turned to Thorondor, the giant eagle standing nearby, and spoke with a seriousness that matched Gandalf's warning. "Thorondor, do you still want to take this risk?" The giant eagle could not speak, but he met Dewey's gaze and nodded with calm determination. That settled Dewey's hesitation. If Thorondor wished to become stronger, he would not force him back. Dewey opened his vial, poured 2 spoonfuls, and drank. The dose would grant roughly 6 hours of luck, enough, he hoped, to see them through the procedure. The effect was immediate. Warmth rushed to his head, and a buoyant confidence unfurled through him, as if the world had conspired to aid his hand. Gandalf and Arwen watched his face as it broke into a grin. "I feel great," Dewey said, brimful of certainty. "Let's begin." He raised his wand, aimed at Thorondor, and began the transfiguration. Under the spell, the giant bird began to contract. A wingspan that had once measured 50 meters folded down to 10. New secondary wings emerged. Tail feathers lengthened into 2 splendid fiery plumes. Externally, Thorondor's form shifted from giant eagle to Thunderbird. At this stage, the change was predominantly cosmetic. The body and instincts of the giant eagle remained, but it was a necessary first step. The heart of the challenge lay deeper, to remake Thorondor's internal magic channels. Dewey and Gandalf had earlier managed a crude transformation with an acromantula, giving it a capacity to discharge sparks. The effect was negligible, but it proved conceptually possible. Thorondor's greater native power made the process far more demanding, and as Dewey poured his magic into the bird, forcing new pathways into being, the creature trembled in pain, yet offered no resistance. Slowly, Dewey overlaid a primitive Thunderbird circuit onto the eagle's native lines. Feathers along Thorondor's flanks began to crackle with small electric sparks. For the first time, the transformed bird could discharge measurable electricity. It was a milestone, but not enough. A true Thunderbird commanded storms and weather, summoned lightning and rain on a grand scale. Their research had stalled without a template for such power. Under the influence of Felix Felicis, Dewey's intuition sharpened. Certain routings of the magic field looked awkward to him now, and he felt compelled to reroute them. A tentative adjustment here and a subtle redirection there made the feather's sparks flare brighter, then brighter still. Encouraged, Dewey continued, guided by the inexplicable certainty that each instinctive change was right. But his progress was not without peril. At one pivotal core, he nudged a pathway the wrong way and triggered a surge of conflicting magic. For a terrifying moment, the system threatened to collapse. Dewey fought to suppress the chaos and frantically rethread the circuits. Just when failure seemed imminent, a new configuration suggested itself, more elegant and stable than anything before. It worked. The system smoothed and harmonized, the electric output steadied and intensified. Time, however, was finite. As the effects of Felix Felicis began to wane, Dewey reached for the remaining luck too late, until Gandalf stepped forward. He uncorked the half-vial Dewey had given him, drank half, and felt the same blessed clarity. "This is incredible," Gandalf breathed. "I can see a path through it." Then he set to work. Gandalf's insight proved invaluable. Where Dewey had stumbled, Gandalf discerned the optimal routes and suggested integrations Dewey hadn't conceived. Under Gandalf's guidance, the system responded, and the bird's electrical discharges grew in both power and control. Drawing on his own mastery of lightning and the influence of his ring of fire, Gandalf wove a compatible set of operations into the new circuitry, mechanisms that could call and channel storm energy rather than merely store static shocks. Hours compressed into a concentrated flurry of spells and adjustments. The internal map of Thorondor's magic, its meridians and valves, tightened into a natural, efficient network. The feather's electric glow became a steady, luminous aura, and Thorondor's breath carried the hum of gathering weather. At last, the final configuration snapped into place, seamless as if it had always existed. When they stepped back, breathless and bruised by effort, the creature before them was no longer merely a giant eagle with sparks. It was a thunderbird in the truest sense, a perfect, living conduit of storm and lightning, born at the crossroads of skill, luck, and sacrifice. Chapter 279. Phoenix Thorondor's appearance had changed dramatically. His feathers shimmered in gold and white, patterned like clouds. Though his massive form had shrunk several times, his aura was more powerful than ever. The great eagle's head now bore two horns that crackled with electricity as if charged with terrible power. He had two pairs of wings, a primary pair and a secondary pair, plus a fan of tail feathers that looked like another set of wings, making it seem as if he had three pairs in all. The feathers shone with a metallic luster, shifting colors in the sunlight from gold to blue, gray, silver, white, and deep indigo. Thorondor gave a clear cry to the sky, and a surge of magic poured from him into the clouds. The blue sky darkened within moments as thunderheads rolled in, and a fierce wind rose. The feathers on his body seemed cleansed by the crackling electricity, displaying rainbow sheen and radiating a faint halo. He flapped both pairs of wings, lifted from the nest, and shot into the storm, trailing two long tail feathers that dragged thunderclouds in his wake. Lightning flashed through the clouds. Heavy rain began to fall, and Hogwarts welcomed the downpour. Thorondor's figure flickered in the storm, lit by electric arcs, his cries full of delight. Dewey, Gandalf, and Arwen stood watching. An invisible umbrella held over them kept the rain at bay. "We did it," Dewey beamed. "Congratulations, Duir, you've created a new species." Gandalf chuckled. "No," Dewey corrected with a shake of his head. "This is the result of all of our work, Gandalf." "All right, we made it together." Gandalf smiled, admiring the Thunderbird. "What a magnificent creature. I suspect the title King of the Skies may have a new bearer." "But Thorondor was originally a giant eagle," Arwen said, watching him soar. "Now that he's become a Thunderbird, it doesn't take away the giant eagle's place." She was happy for Dewey and for Thorondor. She had cared for the bird when he was weak, even preparing special elven food to help him gain strength. Now she could hear confidence in Thorondor's cries. Down in Hogsmeade at the foot of the mountain, people noticed the commotion on Weathertop. Dark clouds rolled over the castle, lightning flashed, and a gigantic bird streaked through the storm, trailing bolts of electricity. The rain centered over Weathertop, spread across the sky, and soon crossed the Black Lake to drench Hogsmeade. Villagers hurried indoors, watching the spectacle from the pubs and debating the strange bird they suspected had brought the storm. The rain did not last long. It washed the town clean and left the air fresh. A rainbow arced over the Black Lake, linking Hogsmeade and Weathertop. On Weathertop, the golden malong tree glowed brighter after being washed. Raindrops clung to its leaves like diamonds. When the excitement had subsided, Thorondor descended, wings beating gracefully, and landed before Dewey, Gandalf, and Arwen. He rubbed his head against Dewey and cooed softly. Dewey stroked his feathers. A thrill of electricity tingled up his arm. "Congratulations, Thorondor," Dewey said. "You're no longer the giant eagle Thorondor. You're a brand new, one-of-a-kind thunderbird. Aren't you happy?" Thorondor cooed like a child with a new prize, proud and affectionate. Dewey laughed and patted his head. Gandalf and Arwen watched the quiet communication between man and bird without disturbing them. After the transformation, Thorondor's body crackled with electricity and could easily have set wood alight. His original wooden nest was no longer suitable. Dewey melted a large pile of iron ore, drew it into thin wires, and used magic to weave a vast nest of iron. He fixed it to the malong tree and then used the Philosopher's Stone to transmute it into gold. Thorondor moved in contentedly. The occasional stray current from his body kept the golden nest shining as if new. The success with Thorondor gave Dewey confidence to attempt his own transformation into a phoenix animagus. After a few days' rest, he felt fully refreshed and his magic returned to peak. Under Gandalf and Arwen's watchful eyes, Dewey prepared the Balrog heart and a half bottle of Felix Felicis. He drank the Felix Felicis first, ensuring 6 hours of luck. Then he forced the spear Aeglos into the Balrog heart. Cracks ran through the heart until it shattered, revealing a golden flame at its core, the Balrog's life fire, which, after Galadriel's purification, had reverted to its original, sacred Maya flame. Dewey shifted into owl form and swallowed the flame in one agonizing gulp. Pain racked him, far worse than swallowing burning coal. His throat and esophagus felt scoured. When the flame reached his stomach, it raged, unleashing searing heat that threatened to consume him. He writhed on the ground. "Duir," Arwen cried, fear in her voice. She wanted to rush forward, but held back. Gandalf stepped up decisively. He activated the Ring of Fire and poured its power into Dewey, shouting, "Hold on, Dewey! Reconstruct your magic circuit, now!" The ring's power flowed into him and suppressed the Balrog fire enough for Dewey to act. He gritted his teeth, forcing his mind into the reconstruction of a new magic circulation system, the Phoenixes. He and Gandalf had already designed the layout. Now Dewey had to rewire his internal pathways, step by careful step. It was like rebuilding meridians in a martial artist's body. One wrong move could cripple you. Reconstructing a magic circuit was even more perilous. If it went wrong, uncontrolled magic could tear the body apart. Had he not taken Felix Felicis, he might never have avoided the worst pitfalls. Luck allowed him to sidestep danger repeatedly, replacing nodes in his internal network without collapsing the whole. Slowly, he completed the Phoenix magic circuit. His owl form shifted as golden red feathers erupted, his body radiating intense heat. Yet when he checked against the original design, he felt it could be improved, but time was short and the Felix Felicis effect was fading. He hesitated. Arwen must have read him. She pulled out another bottle of Felix Felicis Dewey had given her, opened it, and set it to his lips. "Drink it," she said gently. "Your condition is the most important thing. You can pay me back next time you brew Felix." Dewey felt warmth at her gesture. He looked at her, smiled, and drank. 6 more hours of luck flowed into him. With renewed focus and blessed by fortune, he adjusted the awkward pathways. He even triggered a localized flare of magic during one modification, a false alarm that, by fortune, led to a perfect refinement. All the while, he absorbed the purified Balrog fire, integrating it into his magic. Though Galadriel had cleansed it of wildness, it remained a powerful, scorching flame. Without the Ring of Fire's protection, Dewey would have burned to ash. With its aid, the Balrog fire and the ring's power condensed in his core into a wisp of flame, the Phoenix's nirvana fire, the seed of immortality. When the last of the Balrog fire settled into him, his magic circuit was complete, more flawless than the original design. His animagus form finalized into a large, golden red bird about the size of a swan. Its feathers glowed flame-hot gold and red, Its beak and talons shone like burnished gold. Black eyes burned with intelligence. A long, flowing tail like a peacock's trailed shimmering golden feathers. The red plumage gave off a faint glow in shadow, and the golden parts seemed to smolder. When excited, clusters of golden flame danced along his feathers, lending him a sacred, noble presence. Duir regarded his new form and felt immediate satisfaction. It resembled the phoenix he remembered, and in many ways was even more perfect. Chapter 280, Nirvana and Rebirth. Having at last completed his transformation into a phoenix, Duir was eager to test its powers. He spread his wings and rose effortlessly. He felt weightless, confident he could lift hundreds, even thousands of pounds in flight. Feathers along his body stood on end, glowing gold and radiating fierce heat. His wings ignited in a blaze of golden flame. With a sweep, those flames lashed down toward the floor, beautiful to watch, but scorching enough to melt steel. More than mere fire, they were suffused with light and sanctity, like sunfire itself, devastating to creatures of darkness and terrifying to light-fearing orcs and trolls. As his red plumage flashed, golden red flames wrapped Dewey's body. Enveloped, he vanished and reappeared a heartbeat later somewhere else in the room, a flash of light, a crackle of heat. It was the Phoenix's teleportation, part apparition, part portkey. It ignored anti-apparition wards and distance alike, letting him go wherever he pleased. Before he could shift back to human, his eye caught the broken Balrog heart fragments scattered on the floor. An odd, hungry urge welled up in him. Perhaps the Phoenix mind was different, smaller, more instinctive, because he didn't hesitate. He dove and pecked at the fragments. Warmth spread through him as he consumed them. The Phoenix fire inside flared brighter. Then suddenly the flames erupted out of control. Flames burst around him, surging from within until he felt like a living furnace about to explode. Panic flared. He tried to restrain it, to calm the fire, and attempted to apparate out of the castle, but in the moment of transit, the wildfire distorted him. Something went wrong, and he rematerialized in the mithril furnace. The furnace was packed with Balrog heart crystals. It was a tormented little volcano, hot enough to melt mithril. Appearing inside it was like dropping an oil barrel into an inferno. Dewey could not hold the blaze in. With an explosive scream, his body spontaneously ignited. The heat surged outward from his core. He burned from the inside. The pain was unbearable. "Duir!" Arwen cried, paling. She lunged for the furnace, but Gandalf caught her arm and held her back, oddly composed. "Arwen, don't rush," he said. "Felix Felicis is still in his veins. He will survive this. I think this will do him good. We should wait and see." Reluctantly, she stayed, face stricken with worry as they watched the furnace. Inside, Dewey was a whirling column of flame. The Balrog heart crystals fed him, their elemental fire pouring into him and quickening the incineration. Those crystals were concentrated fire essence, like oil on embers, and Dewey's combustion only intensified. His consciousness blurred, then went out. Outside, the sound of movement dwindled to nothing. Gandalf and Arwen waited in a hush until even that stopped. After a long, silent stretch, Arwen, unable to bear it, went to the furnace and opened the lid despite the residual heat. The sight inside stunned her. The Balrog heart crystals lay drained and powdered, cold and dead. The furnace had lost its heat and flame. The only thing left was a small pile of gray ash at the bottom. Gandalf and Arwen stared at that heap. From within it, life stirred and strengthened. A small head popped out, the size of a newly hatched chick, sparse gold and red down glinting. It chirped with a clear, ringing note and blinked at the two giants leaning over it, as if surprised to see them. Its face, oddly human in expression, registered shock. "Duir?" Arwen asked hesitantly. The chick peeped and nodded. Gandalf smiled. "He has undergone a phoenix rebirth. He's completed his metamorphosis and reached the phoenix's most perfected state." Arwen reached in and lifted the tiny bird. It nestled in her palm, fragile and absurdly adorable. "Duir, can you return to human form now?" she asked, anxiety and tenderness mingling in her voice. The chick nodded again, though less sure. Arwen set it gently on the floor. Dewey concentrated, calling back the memory of his human magic circuits. The circuits rewove themselves, and his body swelled, transforming faster than seemed possible. In an instant he was human, but not as he had been. He had reverted to the body of a toddler, 2 or 3 years old. Arwen's shock melted into a delighted smile. She looked ready to scoop him into her arms. Gandalf chuckled heartily, amused. Well, Duir, you're very cute like this. Are you still planning to marry Arwen next year, or should I ask Lord Elrond to postpone the wedding until you grow up? Dewey blushed fiercely, embarrassed by his nakedness. He covered himself with one hand, and with the other flicked wandless magic to summon his wand and conjure a child's outfit that fit perfectly. He shot Gandalf an annoyed glare. No need. Thanks anyway. If it comes to it, I can brew an aging potion. Besides, phoenixes grow fast. A year should be enough to return to adult size. He said it with bravado, but his voice was high and innocent, betraying his toddler form. Arwen's eyes shone. She resisted the urge to cuddle him. Gandalf's amusement only deepened. Dewey huffed at the old wizard and climbed back onto the furnace. He swept a band of ash into a bottle, the phoenix ashes left after rebirth. In the magical world, those ashes were priceless, key components for resurrection draughts and powerful restorative reagents able to mend severely damaged artifacts. Looking at the empty furnace, Dewey felt a pang of regret. The Balrog heart crystals that had fed his rebirth were irreplaceable. The furnace's forging power had been spent. Yet without them, he would not have survived his rebirth and acquired the full Phoenix Animagus. In the balance, it had been worth it. The change to Dewey's life was profound. With the Phoenix Animagus, he had a form of immortality without needing the Philosopher's Stone or an elixir of life. When old or fatally wounded, he could choose rebirth, combust into flame and be reborn from ash as a chick, beginning a new life cycle. The cost was severe. Every rebirth was agonizing beyond ordinary burning. Most victims of fire die quickly and feel little after the first shock. A phoenix undergoing rebirth experiences the flames, the incineration of flesh and bone, until nothing remains but ash. Only then does the pain stop. It was a torturous price for immortality. There were upsides. Phoenix rebirth could heal even fatal injuries. It could survive spells meant to end life. Repeatedly, though, it had limits. Each rebirth weakened the phoenix fire inside, requiring long periods of recovery to return to full strength. If a phoenix were forced into too many rebirths in quick succession, the inner fire could be exhausted. Once that flame died, the phoenix's true death would follow. Dewey, now a small child, understood that immortality came with its own vulnerabilities. He would not become reckless. He had gained a second life, but it came wrapped in pain, infancy, and the slow, careful tending of the fire within. Chapter 281, Gollum Duir, now reverted to a child, ran into more than a few practical problems. His tiny body made climbing stairs a chore, and he could hardly hold his wand, let alone a staff. Butler Edward and the castle servants at first assumed the rosy-cheeked little boy was the Lord's illegitimate son. Only when they were forced to accept the impossible, that their master had become a child, did stunned reality settle in like a dream. Besides the astonished looks from everyone, Duir had to survive Arwen's sudden onslaught of maternal affection. She tried to hold him constantly, pinched his cheeks, fed him the kinds of food elven children ate, and even began making him children's clothes. Duir found her enthusiasm terrifying. If she kept fussing over him like this, she'd end up loving him only as a child. He couldn't bear that. So, having learned his lesson the hard way, the little Duir resolutely pushed Arwen away with a determined look and set about preparing an aging potion. The ingredients weren't rare. He simply ordered Butler Edward to fetch everything. In 2 days, he had it all. He set a cauldron nearly as tall as he was on the hearth, poured in 2 pints of red wine and half a pint of plum juice, and began to simmer the mixture over medium heat. Standing on a small stool, he gripped the stirring rod with both hands and worked it counterclockwise until the liquid turned deep purple and began to bubble. He ground 2 ounces of fringe cup into a smooth paste, sprinkled it evenly into the pot, then switched to stirring clockwise for 10 minutes. His little arms ached. Being young again had sapped his strength, and he only wanted it restored. As the liquid paled to a light purple, he added 2 ounces of finely powdered turtle shell while keeping the heat low and let it gently simmer. 8 minutes later, the brew was a creamy color. Duir lifted the cauldron from the fire to cool, filtered out the turtle shell grit through fine gauze, then returned the cauldron to the heat. He sliced 5 caterpillars into thin pieces, added half of them, along with half of the dried granulated bat tongues, and stirred clockwise. After 8 minutes, he added the rest of the caterpillars and bat tongues, stirred counterclockwise twice, and put out the fire. He didn't stop stirring until the potion had cooled, 15 minutes of constant motion. Sweat beaded on his brow, but when he looked at the milky white liquid in the pot, satisfaction warmed his small face. He decanted the potion into bottles and took one to examine. The potency of an aging potion depends on craftsmanship. A typical brew might make someone a month older per drop for a day, but Duir had Professor Snape's notes and brewed it with masterful precision. 1 drop from his batch could add a year of age and last an entire month. Calculating how much he needed, he measured out 20 drops and drank them in 1 gulp. Time snapped forward. In an instant, the toddler swelled into a young man in his early 20s. He conjured a mirror and examined himself with a nod of approval. Younger than before, but handsome and familiar. When he walked back out of the potion room and caught sight of Arwen, a flicker of regret crossed her face. Duir felt a pang. Was she regretting rejecting her handsome fiancé for a little brat? If she loved children so much, Duir plotted silently, they could always have more in the future. Far to the east, in Mordor, Barad-dûr towered over a different scene. Inside an iron cage, a twisted, emaciated figure cowered, its large, pale eyes full of terror as it stared at the shadowed presence beyond. It was Gollum, once the bearer of the One Ring. After Bilbo had taken the ring in the depths of Goblin Town, Gollum hunted him relentlessly. He tracked Bilbo's trail to Dale and learned Bilbo had gone back to the Shire, so he followed. Passing through Mirkwood, he was discovered by patrolling elves and forced to flee south to Dol Guldur, where a wandering orc spoke Duir's name. Gollum remembered the black-robed wizard. It was Duir who had found him back in Goblin Town and nearly ended him. Hearing that this wizard lingered near Isengard, Gollum tried to get close, only to be kept away by the wild men on the perimeter. He attempted a crossing from Fangorn Forest, but was ambushed by Ents and Huorns and barely escaped with his life. When the wild men left Isengard to aid Rohan in the east, Gollum thought he'd found his chance. Then Isengard was attacked by a massive frost dragon and a winged host. The sky became a chaos of ice and fire. Fear overwhelmed Gollum's hunger for the ring. He fled, headed east. The ring's residual shadow tugged at him toward Mordor, and before he could go far, he was swept up in the tornado of Saruman's flight to the east and carried all the way into Mordor's reach. Mordor had learned to sense the mark of the ring carrier. Sauron's forces found Gollum and brought him to Barad-dûr. They tortured him for the ring's whereabouts, but the thing Gollum feared most was the Dark Lord himself. "Gollum, tell me, where is the One Ring?" Sauron's voice flowed with dark, persuasive power. Gollum tried to speak, but no sound came. Angered at the apparent refusal, Sauron unleashed a crushing aura. Shadowy tendrils lashed at Gollum, driving him into helpless wails. Gollum's thin body trembled, like a candle in a storm. Sauron's hunger for the ring overrode everything else, even thoughts of distant treasures like a philosopher's stone that could reshape flesh. He could not kill Gollum before learning the ring's fate. He drove the creature to the brink, then paused and demanded again. "Speak. Where is the One Ring? Tell me, or I will turn you into a wraith and burn you in dark fire forever." Tears streaked down Gollum's face. Something in him shifted. Smeagol, the more human half, fought to the surface, driven by a desperate will to survive. He clutched his throat and whispered, weak and shaking, I want to speak, but I can't. There's something stopping me. Don't kill me." Sauron narrowed his eyes. The iron cage dissolved, and the dark tendrils drew the cowering figure closer. He peered at Gollum as if seeing through him. Then Sauron felt a faint, foreign power brushing against his senses, an oath of concealment, not bound to Gollum, but preventing anyone who knew of the ring from speaking its name. "This is the power of an oath," Sauron hissed, realization flaring within him. "It doesn't target him directly. It keeps those who know from speaking. Someone hides my ring." The great flaming eye of Barad-dûr swept westward, searching for the source. "Someone capable of oath magic," Sauron murmured, naming possibilities like a hunt narrowing in. "Smaug the Dragon, the black-robed wizard Duir, is it you?" Chapter 282, Tracking the Ring. Sauron had begun to suspect that Duir had hidden the One Ring. Coupled with the knowledge that Duir already possessed the Philosopher's Stone, an object Sauron coveted, the possibility of the ring being in Duir's hands became urgent. Saruman, too, felt a flicker of greed when he heard of the ring. He forced his expression into calm, lowered his gaze, and let his thoughts churn carefully. Sauron, however, looked instead at the crouched, trembling figure before him, Gollum. He diverted his will and poured dark power into the creature. Gollum's body healed almost at once, strength returning, but the same dark force ate into him as it restored him. When he could stand, Gollum stared at his own body in disbelief. His pale, bulging eyes filled with gratitude, and he prostrated himself, chittering out thanks. "I can spare your life," Sauron said. "I can allow you to go free, but you must help me find the One Ring. Can you do that?" Gollum's eyes widened, then brightened. He nodded frantically. "Gollum can! Gollum will help find the precious!" Sauron gestured, and two dark guards moved forward to seize him. Saruman watched with thin contempt. "Is it wise to spare this nothing and set him to search for the ring?" Sauron smiled with cold certainty. "Gollum wore the ring for hundreds of years. He is linked to it. He will be drawn to it. He will find it and bring it back." His gaze turned westward. "Our failure at Isengard cost us a frost dragon and dozens of magic dragons. There can be no mistakes this time. Let this little creature scout for us. Once the ring's location is confirmed, we will strike with thunder and reclaim it." Saruman spoke again, skeptical. "But if this worm finds the ring, will he willingly hand it over? His greed is plain. He may flee into the mountains and hide it." Sauron said nothing. He summoned the ring-wraiths and commanded, "Shadow him. Follow and observe in the netherworld. Do not alert him." The ring-wraiths bowed, then their spectral forms slipped into the netherworld to trail Gollum and spy on him from the unseen plane. Gollum was cast out like refuse beyond the black gate of Mordor. He watched the Mumakil and soldiers turn away without a second look and felt unreal, as though in a dream. "Gollum is free! Smeagol, we are free!" he whispered, hardly keeping his voice down. But joy was short. The thunder of Mordor's doors and the memory of torture set him to flight. Like a skittish bird, he ran west without pause. He caught a stray wild horse and clung to its neck, riding until the animal was exhausted. When the horse finally collapsed, Gollum devoured its raw meat and blood, and his two selves argued, as they always did. Smeagol, the faintly human side, wanted safety and to hide back in the misty mountains. Gollum hissed that cowardice was weakness. The precious must be found and kept. No one would steal it again. Gollum never planned to hand the ring to Sauron. He had learned in Mordor that Duir's main camp lay at Weathertop and that the Shire lay to the west of it. He remembered Bilbo Baggins claiming to be from the Shire. If the mysterious black-robed wizard could cloak the ring from Sauron's sight, perhaps that wizard had seen or even taken it. Having held the ring himself for so long, Gollum knew how irresistible it was. He suspected Duir first. If Duir did not have the ring, perhaps he could at least lead him to Bilbo's whereabouts. His plan was simple: reach Weathertop, spy, and find the precious. He would never give it up. Months passed. Since the phoenix's nirvana, Duir's phoenix animagus had shed its juvenile plumage and grown into a swan-sized phoenix. Duir himself had grown older by roughly 10 years in appearance. Without constant aging potions, he looked like a 12 or 13-year-old boy. He no longer took the potions daily, only when he courted Arwen. The castle servants and the two mayors who reported regularly had moved from shock to reverence at their lord's extraordinary nature. Duir had brewed another batch of Felix Felicis. He needed some for himself and wished to repay Arwen and Gandalf for the doses they had used. The potion had helped Thorondor become a Thunderbird and Duir to become a phoenix. Its luck-shaping power had been nothing short of miraculous. But Felix Felicis could not be overused. Mild overindulgence brought dizziness, recklessness, and arrogance. Severe misuse brought addiction or death. The body also built resistance. Repeated consumption reduced and eventually nullified the potion's effects. Professor Slughorn had drunk it 3 times in his life. Duir had drunk it twice and could only afford 2 or 3 uses more if he wished to avoid arrogance. By the time the Felix was ready, half of the year 2948 had already slipped by. Only 3 months remained until Duir and Arwen's wedding. Duir gave Arwen a dose sufficient for 12 hours of unerring luck and dispatched a 6-hour dose to Gandalf by Owl. Gandalf was not at Weathertop. Duir prepared quietly for the coming marriage. One night, beneath a veiled moon, a thin shape crept down to the Black Lake. Gollum crouched in the reeds and watched the castle on the hill across the water, his great pale eyes full of hunger. The only bridge across the lake was guarded. The entrance bristled with militia. For days he had lurked, sleeping in caves by day and prowling by night, eavesdropping for any chance to penetrate the castle. He found that fishermen still moored boats at a little pier and waited for darkness. When clouds hid the moon, Gollum slipped to the pier, untied a boat, and paddled by hand. Mist rose around him. He moved with all the caution of a hunted thing. Midway across, however, he sensed something beneath the surface. He froze, listening. When nothing moved, he paddled again, inching forward until hope flooded his face. Then the boat began to drift backward. Below the hull, a cold pressure gripped the wood. Giant tentacles curled around the keel and pulled. Several enormous appendages surfaced and wound around the boat, lifting it. The monstrous body of a kraken rose from the lake, its many eyes glinting and its tentacles treating the craft like a plaything. Gollum's face went white with fear. The tentacles tightened. The boat creaked and splintered into boards. A tentacle coiled around Gollum and squeezed, his bulbous eyes nearly popping. The kraken opened its vast maw to swallow him, but it froze. Pain tore through it like lightning. It screamed and flung Gollum clear. Dark blue blood stained the lake. Thrown into the water, Gollum scrabbled with practiced strokes and clawed himself back to the shore, shaking and breathless at the sight of the wounded Leviathan. Duir, asleep in the castle, was jolted awake by the kraken's wail. He apparated to the lakeside. The kraken lay half submerged, a wide gash along its belly bleeding that uncanny blue blood. Duir parted the waters with a wave and the word finite in chem so his sight could take in the whole creature. The wound was clean, and at its edges a dark aura writhed. A curse clung to the cut, eating away the flesh and preventing it from healing. Duir's face tightened with concern. The blade that had opened the kraken had left more than a wound. It had left a malediction. He knelt at the water's edge, ready to act, but the question of who or what had carved that cursed blade into such a beast hung heavy in the night air. Chapter 283, Bilbo's Peril. Dewey knew this dark power well. It was the mark of a Morgul blade. He was shocked to see it, but when he watched the kraken bleeding and thrashing in agony, he put his surprise aside to heal the creature first. He waved his wand and tried a standard healing charm, but it did nothing. Not even magic of the caliber Professor Snape used could mend a wound cursed by the dark arts. He retrieved a small golden cup, scooped lake water, swirled it 3 times, and poured it directly onto the wound. The bleeding slowed, and the cut began to knit visibly. Still, Dewey did not relax. The worst thing about a Morgul blade was the shards it left behind, fragments that burrowed deeper and deeper, riding the blood toward the heart and turning the victim into a puppet of the netherworld. Dewey shifted into his phoenix form and let a few drops of his tears fall onto the wound. The tears sizzled where they landed, purifying the dark power. Wisps of black smoke evaporated from the flesh. The hidden Morgul splinters melted and were expelled as if facing their bane. The kraken gave a grateful, piercing cry and fixed its gaze on him. "All right," Dewey said. "Tell me exactly what happened." The kraken answered with a flurry of excited cries. Listening to its thoughts, Dewey grew more alarmed. The beast hadn't seen its attacker clearly. It said it had been about to swallow a creature trying to sneak across when something had appeared at the bottom of the lake, struck it with a weapon, and vanished. From the way the intruder moved and the wounds described, Dewey guessed the attacker's nature. He waved his wand and conjured an image, Gollum's thin, twisted figure. "Was it this one?" he asked. The kraken nodded. Dewey's face hardened. Gollum was here, and the assailant that had ambushed the kraken was almost certainly a ringwraith. Their goal was obvious: keep the kraken from devouring Gollum. With both of them in these waters, only one thing made sense: the ring was nearby. Dewey's stomach tightened. If the Nazgul were hunting here, then Sauron must suspect something. He forced himself to remember that the ring had been hidden under the Fidelius charm and entrusted to Tom Bombadil. that calmed him enough to continue thinking. Gollum wouldn't have gone far. He sent his wand light to guide him. The beam arced across the lake toward Hogsmeade, and Dewey apparated to the far shore, but the light went erratic, wobbling as if a shielding power interfered. He frowned and tried Hummervlio to flush out any nearby hiding place for Gollum, but found nothing. Back at Hogwarts, he pulled out the Palantir to track the creature instead. The crystal answered with a single, terrible image, a fiery eye. Sauron was watching. Dewey snatched the light of Erendil from his pocket and shone it into the glass. The eye recoiled. He sealed the Palantir and locked it in a mithril box, the light laying warding on the lid. Sauron could use a Master Stone to pry images through lesser crystals, making the Palantir too dangerous to leave in place. With that avenue closed, Dewey considered using Felix Felicis to follow Gollum, but he balked. The potion was too precious. Gollum himself was not the sole concern. It was Sauron's interest in the ring that mattered most. Refusing to give up, Dewey changed into his phoenix shape and rose above the castle. His radiant light poured outward, a holy brightness that would not let darkness hide. He sang, an otherworldly, clear song threaded with magic, blending the power of the Ring of Fire and the Horn of Victory. The cry dispelled fear and soothed souls. To things of shadow, it sounded like thunder, restraining and deterring them. Hogsmeade's sleeping folk dreamed easier at the sound. Thorondor the Thunderbird rose from his nest too, circling above Weathertop beneath storms and lightning, as if a god of thunder watched over the land, his keen eyes sweeping the ground below. Night passed into dawn. No sign of Gollum or the Nazgul appeared. Dewey conceded that Gollum was an expert at hiding, and the Ringwraiths, who could slip into the Wraith world, would be hard to counter without preparation. He set wards and alarm magics around the area, so he would know the moment Gollum or a Ringwraith reappeared. Days crept on, and Dewey's wedding drew near when the castle's fireplaces flared green. Bilbo tumbled out of the flames into the hearth room, disheveled and shaken. "Duir!" he cried. "Gollum's come to the Shire." Dewey helped him up and inspected his injuries. Bilbo bore a few scratches and a clear bite mark on his hand. "I'm all right," Bilbo panted. "Thanks to the Flu Network, I could get here from Bag End, but Gollum's still at Bag End!" Dewey healed Bilbo's wounds with a quick charm. "Come on, let's go to Bag End." He became a phoenix, scooped Bilbo into his blazing wings, and in a flash they vanished. When they reappeared, they were inside Bag End. Dewey reverted to human form and frowned at the wrecked room. Drawers upturned, cupboards emptied, signs of a frantic search. But Gollum was gone. "Revelio," Dewey said, and golden mist swept through the burrow, condensing into images of what had happened. Bilbo sat in his study writing when Gollum slipped in. Before Bilbo realized, Gollum struck him with a wooden cudgel and bound him. He searched Bilbo's person and then overran the house, tearing it apart in a desperate hunt. Finding nothing, the creature grew furious and pressed a cleaver to Bilbo's throat, demanding the ring's location. Bilbo, however, was no longer the timid hobbit from long ago. Hardened by the Lonely Mountain and other adventures, he remained calm. He stalled with words, tricked Gollum into believing the ring had been hidden somewhere impossible to find, and promised to give it back. Gollum, gullible and eager, loosened Bilbo's bonds. Bilbo kicked him over, ran to the hearth, grabbed a handful of Flu powder, threw it into the fire, and vanished in a swirl of green sparks before Gollum could stop him. The sudden blaze frightened Gollum back, and he watched helplessly as Bilbo escaped. Dewey assumed Gollum would retreat. Instead, the creature lurched toward the hearth and snatched a fistful of Flu powder. He mimicked Bilbo, throwing the powder into the flames and shoving his hand through the green fire. He looked astonished to feel no burn. Then he shoved himself into the blaze, muttering something under his breath. Dewey could not hear the words, but he read the movement of the creature's mouth. "Hogwarts Castle." Bilbo hung his head. "I'm sorry, Duir. I think I've caused you trouble." Dewey waved away his apology. "No need. He walked straight into a trap and saved me the trouble of searching." He restored Bag End to order with a few quick spells, temporarily shut off the Flu connection at the hearth, and took Bilbo back to Weathertop. The castle was alive with alarm. Thorondor had sounded a warning, and black storm clouds roiled above, lightning flaring. The portraits were abuzz, speculating about the uninvited guest. Dewey asked his own portrait for news. A painting on the 7th floor had just seen Gollum and thought he must be nearby. Apparated to the 7th floor and cast hominum revelio. A golden wave spread outward, revealing hidden presences. Found you, he sneered as a small, shivering figure curled in the chimney was exposed. Gollum's eyes went wide with panic. He snatched up a handful of flue powder and flung it down the chimney, shouting, "Bag end!" Green flames roared, but nothing happened. Dewey had already shut down the castle's flue network. Gollum refused to give up and flung fistful after fistful of powder into the hearth, calling out place after place. Instead of transporting, the soot choked him. Tears and snot ran down his face. Dewey's face was cold with amusement. With a flick, the fireplace bricks parted, and Gollum tumbled forward, trembling. "Petrificus tollus," he said, and Gollum froze stiff as a board, limbs locked, the creature utterly helpless. Chapter 284, Stolen Ring. Dewey snorted softly, waved his hand, and brought the petrified creature down the stairs. Bilbo, who had been waiting, was at first startled and then relieved to see Gollum returned. Dewey threw him to the floor and flicked his fingers to end the petrification. "Don't even think about running," Dewey said coldly. "Try, and I won't promise I won't kill you." He watched Gollum tremble, eyes darting around, trying to take in his surroundings. At Dewey's words, Gollum shrank back and swallowed his scheming thoughts. Fear filled his gaze. "Tell me," Dewey continued, "how did you travel all this way to my lands? You attacked Bilbo's home, and then you came here to my castle. What were you trying to do?" Gollum's eyes shifted nervously as he answered. Gollum wants his precious. Baggins took it. Gollum only wants his precious back." "Still trying to play at riddles?" Dewey said. He reached into Gollum's mind with legilimency, and seeing everything, cast Crucio without hesitation. Gollum's scream tore the air. He curled on the floor, racked with pain, two voices inside him chattering in frantic attempts to share and dull the torment. Even Bilbo, who had felt a measure of relief at Gollum's capture, felt his stomach tighten as the creature's veins bulged and his eyes bulged beneath crawling skin. He wanted to say something, but the sight stilled his tongue. Dewey did not prolong it. When Gollum lay nearly senseless, he stopped the curse and casually laid on a few minor healing spells. "Can you speak coherently now?" he asked, voice level, "or shall I give you more Crucio to think it over?" Gollum looked at him like a beaten thing. No, I'll talk. He told them everything he could remember. Bilbo taking the One Ring and his pursuit, being swept away by a storm outside Isengard, ending up in Mordor and suffering under Sauron, being released, and wandering toward Weathertop. He had failed to get in, turned to Bree, found hobbit servants there, and learned Bilbo's name and address. Bilbo, who was famous in the Shire now, who had gone on an expedition to the Lonely Mountain and had become known as a friend of the black-robed wizard Duir and a frequent guest at Hogwarts Castle. From those hobbits he learned where Bag End was. He went there, attacked, and tried to take the ring back. The ring was gone from Bilbo's hand, and Gollum suspected Dewey had taken it. When Bilbo vanished by flue to Hogwarts, Gollum used the flue network too, hoping to sneak into the castle and find the ring. He even thought Bilbo might bring Dewey with him, and gambled on catching them by surprise. Both Dewey and Bilbo were struck by Gollum's obstinacy. The expedition to the Lonely Mountain had been in 2941, 7 years ago, and he had never given up. He had crossed the Misty Mountains alone, threaded Mirkwood, fled orcs and wargs and acromantulas and elves and ents, and somehow survived. It was a cruel kind of luck. "Who hurt the kraken that almost swallowed you crossing the Black Lake?" Dewey asked. Gollum shook his head. "I don't know. After I left Mordor, I ran, and there felt like eyes on me, watching, but I couldn't see them. I swam to the shore, ran until Bree. I always tried to shake those hidden eyes, but they followed. I came to Baggins's house, came here through the fireplace, and then the eyes stopped." His story was disordered, but Dewey believed him. If Sauron had released Gollum, then ringwraiths might have been trailing him, even interfering with other dangers so that Gollum would survive until the ring was found. If so, some of those watchers could still be in the Shire. An idea came to Dewey. He smiled and looked down at the trembling creature. "Gollum, let's play a game. If you cooperate, I'll spare your life." Both Gollum and Bilbo looked puzzled. Dewey drew a golden ring from his robes and tossed it to Gollum. My precious! Gollum lunged, greed lighting his face. He slipped the ring onto his finger. The surprise flickered to delight, then to confusion, and finally to fury as he hurled it back. No, no. Fake! It's false. Dewey's face did not change. He made the ring hover before Gollum's nose. From now on, it is real. Gollum flinched under the stare, suddenly small. Dewey continued, I will announce that a treasure owned by my friend and left here for safekeeping has been stolen. I will put out wanted posters across the territories. So you will go out carrying this treasure you stole, wandering about to draw those eyes that hunt you. I suppose you'd rather not be watched all the time, Gollum hesitated, his long, withered hand trembling. Dewey did not wait for refusal. He stepped forward. Give me your hand. Gollum held it out, shaking. Dew touched the tip of his wand to Gollum's arm and murmured a few quiet words. Pain crossed the creature's face, but he dared not pull away. Slowly, a mark formed, a pair of trees etched into his skin. Dewey had adapted Lord Voldemort's dark mark, replacing its vile skull with twin trees that resembled the White Tree and a Malorn-like tree from Weathertop. This was the first time he had ever used such a mark. Like the original, it could summon and communicate with those it connected to, and it could become agony personified if its bearer tried to betray him. The golden ring itself was altered too. Dewey had enchanted it with Confundo to make anyone who saw it mistake it for the One Ring, and had threaded a makeshift cloaking charm into it so that a wearer would vanish in a way resembling the original ring's power. It was a clever illusion and a serviceable magical device. All right, Dewey said, you may go, but if you do not obey, you will suffer. To prove the threat, he twisted the mark. Pain like Crucio flared through Gollum's arm as the tree roots of the mark seemed to burrow deeper, gnawing into flesh and bone. Dewey let the agony peak, then stopped. It left Gollum whimpering, half crazed, but alive. Gollum slipped the golden ring on again and vanished. Bilbo gasped, scanning the room for any sign of him. Only Dewey, linked to the mark, could sense the direction of Gollum's flight. Dewey watched him run down the mountain, then turned back to Bilbo. We'll make the announcement now. Tell them a treasure I was keeping was stolen. A golden ring that grants invisibility. Put up wanted posters for the thief, and reward anyone who helps us catch him. Bilbo, still puzzled but trusting Dewey, nodded. Soon, news spread from the castle. A thief had entered Hogwarts and stolen a deposited treasure, a golden ring that could make one invisible. The Lord had put out a wanted notice, warning the populace to secure their homes and property, and offering a generous reward for the thief's capture. Portraits of Gollum were posted at the gates of Hogsmeade and in Bree. The towns went into a frenzy. Many locked up valuables and barred doors against an invisible intruder. Many more were drawn by the reward and the thought of an invisibility ring. Schemes to trap the thief proliferated: food bait, hunting hounds, footprint searches. The commotion spread far beyond the Shire. Soon enough, Gollum's trail was picked up. Someone discovered poultry torn and eaten raw, and noticed tiny footmarks. Hounds picked up the scent. In an abandoned warehouse, Gollum was found, ravenously devouring food. A fierce chase followed. Though he slipped their grasp, witnesses saw him snatch the golden ring and vanish into thin air. The story of the golden ring and the monster thief exploded into feverish gossip, and the hunt became hotter than ever. Chapter 285, Resurrection of the Corpse. Chapter 284, The Barrow Wights Revival. Everyone was talking about the ring, especially those who had seen it, and they spoke of its magic in vivid detail. Such talk naturally attracted the attention of men with other designs. In a Hogsmeade tavern, a cloaked figure sat in a shadowed corner, listening to the conversation while a black staff leaned against his chair. If Duir had been there, he would have been astonished, for the stranger was none other than Saruman. He wore the guise of a traveler, and his staff passed for a walking stick. Hogsmeade, visited by merchants, bards, and adventurers who came to see Weathertop Castle and the Two Trees of Valinor, was a place where such an appearance drew little notice. Saruman had not come at Sauron's command. He had come secretly, and for a single purpose: the One Ring. He was never as blindly loyal to Sauron as the Nazgul. Saruman had his own ambitions. News that Gollum had stolen a golden ring, and that the theft had become public, had drawn him like a moth to flame. Sauron had promised him a forged ring of power, but Saruman's appetite would not be sated by any imitation. He coveted the One Ring itself, believing that with it he could displace Sauron and seize power for himself. Still, he was cautious. This was Duir's territory, and Saruman could not afford to draw attention by performing overt magic. If Duir in the castle noticed him, failure would follow. If Sauron discovered him here, his treachery would be exposed and he would be caught between two merciless fires. For now he listened, watched, and waited, confident but wary. Far to the west on the Barrow Downs, the Witch King of Angmar stood silent, staring out over land that had once teemed with Barrow wights. The place that had been steeped in his malice had of late been purified. Only a few weak spirits lay quiet in their graves. Furious that his creation had been so diminished, he drew upon ancient sorceries and let loose a dark chant. The sky blackened, malevolent clouds gathered, and a noxious power crept back over the downs. Black mist, corrupt and writhing with evil intent, coalesced about him. Those mists were the Witch King's servants. Corrupted spirits that burrowed into the graves, took hold of dry bones, and raised them once more. Under that foul influence, the dead opened eyes that glowed with a baleful red, bones knit hard as iron, fingers sharpened into cruel claws. Skeletons and corpses became Barrow wights again, climbing from their tombs with a stiff, swift gait and low, mournful roars. Frost and a bitter wind descended on the hills. Mist drenched the ridge and turned the place ominous once more. In the old forest, Tom Bombadil and Goldberry felt the change. Goldberry looked toward the Barrow Downs with worry, but Tom smiled and waved the trouble away as if nothing could perturb him. "Now, my dear Goldberry," he said at once, wild-armed and jaunty, "worry not. As flowers bloom and leaves fall, as winter gives way to spring, this too shall pass. Come now, let us think of supper." Goldberry drew her gaze back and spoke more gravely. "Those wights are searching for the ring. Tom, do not lose it and cause trouble for Duir and the others." Tom took the One Ring from his pocket, toyed with it in his hand, then slipped it on his little finger and grinned. "Fear not, my dearest. Old Tom will guard it well. This little thing has been restless of late, drawing the wights and that poor hobbit. I must make it behave. I will not have my old forest disturbed by such creatures." Back on the Barrow Downs, the Witch King was far from ignorant of the forest, yet he was absorbed in his triumph. Before him, the newly raised Barrow wights knelt in dark devotion. The spirits he now commanded were the remnants of those slain by Morgul blades, their hearts pierced and bent into his service. By his sorcery, they entered the bodies of the dead and made them his soldiers. In his prime, he had used this dread craft to found Angmar, to ravage Arthedain and Cardolan, and to lay waste to Eriador. He turned his terrible gaze eastward toward Weathertop, then to Bree, nearer and more tempting. "Go upon Bree this night," he commanded. "Sack the town, make its folk your thralls." The wights answered with long, eager cries. Their eyes shone with hungry malice. Bree had grown. Once a hamlet, it now bustled with tens of thousands. Sitting at the crossroads of east-west and north-south roads, Bree had prospered like Hogsmeade, and the safer roads to the Shire only increased traffic. Goods of all kinds flowed through its markets. The Shire's pipeweed, ales, mushrooms, and other produce sold far and wide, even into the south and across the mountains. This trade enriched Bree and spurred its growth. Wood palisades gave way to tall stone walls, and 1,000 militiamen stood watch. A raid by brigands from the South Downs had once been attempted and decisively crushed. Since then, bandits had thought twice before troubling Bree's roads. That night, the gates of Bree had already closed, but inside the town, the streets and inns were still lively. The prancing pony, older than most, still drew the greatest crowds. Mr. Butterbur, who seemed never to sleep, wiped his glasses and caught the news and rumors as always. The stolen golden ring was the chief topic. How some thief had dared to sneak into the castle and steal, and what punishment would be deserved if he were caught. People wondered at the ring's power of invisibility, and their talk brimmed with equal parts scorn and curiosity. Outside the gate, a pair of guards near dozing suddenly sat upright as a cold rolled over them. A low mist crept toward the walls, thickening, and the moon was blotted out by an unknown dark. The older sergeant's face tightened. "Stand to! That fog is wrong," he warned. "Wrong how?" A younger guard muttered, bewildered. The sergeant could not say, only that his old bones told him danger was near. Then faint, flickering lights appeared in the mist, and a shape blacker than shadow flashed through the fog. It struck the gate with the force of a battering ram, and the whole wall trembled. "What in?" breathed the men on the ramparts. The thing struck again and would not be stilled. "Throw a lamp down." "Let us see what it is," the sergeant ordered. An oil lamp was hurled over the battlements and shattered at the base of the gate. Flames licked up and cast a hard light. Under that light, the guards' faces drained of color. Scores, then hundreds of wights poured out of the mist. Their skeletal forms and iron-hard flesh glinted in the firelight. Their low, hollow cries filled the night. "Barrow wights," someone screamed. They came in thousands, swarming forward like a moving mold of death. The men on the walls felt their courage go as the realization struck them. Tonight, the dead had risen again, and they were upon Bree. Chapter 286, The Peril of Bree. Outside the gates of Bree, an army of wights pressed against the city's edge. The sight of them turned the militia's faces ashen. "How are there so many wights? Weren't the wights of the Barrow Downs already dealt with?" a militiaman stammered, voice trembling. No one could answer. Fear had frozen their minds. Some of the militiamen were lifelong residents of Bree, who had grown up on ghastly tales of the Barrow Downs. Before the Lord established order, wights had sometimes wandered the main road past the barrows, and no one dared travel there at night. After years of peace, how could they be back? The militia captain was the first to react. "Everyone, prepare for battle. Ring the alarm bell. We cannot let the wights break in. Bree must not become a slaughterhouse." Men grabbed bows and arrows and took their places on the wall. One ran to the bell tower and rang the alarm wildly. The urgent peal rolled through Bree. Taverns and inns fell silent. Sleepers were woken and hurried to rouse their families. The alarm bell was an old custom. The more frantic and repeated the ringing, the graver the danger. Bandits had once brought only 3 rings and people went on. This bell rang without pause. Panic spread like fire. Mayor Lucky was pulled from sleep by the clamorous bell. A militiaman burst into his house, breathless and terrified. "Mayor! Lucky!" "Wights. Thousands of them are at the gate. They're trying to break through." "What? Wights?" Lucky's eyes flew open, disbelief etched on his face. Where did they come from? Weren't the Barrow Downs cleared? Since Duir had driven the wights from the Barrow Downs, occasional daring souls had checked the barrows and found nothing. Even Lucky had sent men to verify there were no wights left. Now, with hordes before the gate, where had they come from? Fear made Lucky want to flee. As a scion of a prominent Bree family, he'd grown up on tales of a time when hundreds of wights had nearly wiped the town from the map. Thousands, what hope was there? He shivered, picturing hiding places. Then, with a flush of stubborn pride, he halted. "No," he said to himself, straightening. "I am the mayor." He looked at the houses around him, at a city he'd helped build brick by brick. He could not let the wights destroy what his family had made. He could not give Luke cause to mock him. The militiaman who had come to report thought Lucky was about to run, but the mayor surprised him. He donned a suit of spider silk protection, then layered ancestral plate over it. The heavily armored Lucky drew his sword. "Take me to the wall, now. Gather every able-bodied fighter. Women and children, down to the cellars. We cannot let them in." On the battlements, the archers loosed arrows at the wights below. The wights' bodies were like iron. Arrows glanced off. They hammered at the gate with bone and claw. The wooden gate groaned under relentless assault. Some wights even clawed at the stone and began to climb toward the parapets. The militia captain noticed the wights recoiled from flame. He ordered archers to light their arrows. Burned by fire, wights flinched at the flames, licking their rotten rags. Men on the wall doused a few of the climbing wights with oil and set them alight. For a brief moment, it seemed the city had a reprieve. Mayor Lucky arrived, heavy armor making him pant. He had opened the armory and gathered most of the militia. Seeing the thousands of wights with ghostly fires in their eyes, his legs nearly gave way. When the flames drove the creatures back, he felt hope and shouted, "Quick, bring every barrel of oil and kerosene. Now! I have 122 barrels of olive oil in my warehouse. Fetch them and burn these monsters." Lucky's stinginess vanished in the face of annihilation. Men scavenged flammable goods. The prancing pony's owner even poured out strong liquor. The ground before the gate was soaked, then set aflame. A wall of roaring fire rose, painting the night and forcing the wights to recoil. Cheers went up from the battlements. If they could hold until dawn, the sun would drive the wights away. But the cheering died quickly. The wights' red eyes burned brighter, and a thick, black smoke coalesced about them. Ignoring their usual fear of flame, they blurred, turned to shadow, and moved through the fire. The flames singed their rags and burnt their skin, but the smoke wrapped around them as if shielding them. Maddened, they slammed into the gate in wave after wave. Drip by drip may wear down stone, but how could a wooden gate withstand so many furious impacts? The planks splintered. As the wights grinned behind the breach, ready to surge in, they crashed into an iron grate. It was a massive portcullis, forged of iron and set into the wall above the gate, heavy as a small hill. It dropped into place and held. The militiamen stared through its bars at the pressing wights. Mayor Lucky, puffed up with pride, declared, "This was my design when we built the wall." Even those who disliked the boastful mayor looked at him with new respect. The portcullis held firm against every battering. The wights, defeated on the gate, began to pile on one another, forming a writhing ladder of bodies. Thousands of them together could scale the wall like ants crossing a river. Panic flared again. Stones and fire were hurled. Men threw everything they could spare. "We won't hold long," the militia captain cried. "We must send for Lord Duir. Only he can save us." Lucky hesitated, throwing stones with shaking hands. "Ask for help? The road to Hogwarts Castle is swarming with wights. How can anyone get there?" Then his eyes lit. "The prancing pony's hearth. Its fireplace leads to Hogwarts. If we reach it, we can get to Lord Duir." Before they could move on that idea, a piercing cry split the air from the east. Thunder rolled and dark clouds swept in. Lightning cleaved the sky and, in the flashes, a giant shape took form above the clouds. "Thorondor," someone shouted. "Lord Duir's great eagle." Lucky, who often visited Hogwarts Castle to report on Bree, had been fortunate enough to have seen Thorondor before, soaring over Weathertop or perched in the Golden Mile Long Tree. The sight invoked a thrill of hope. Even the wights, mid-climb, faltered as if sensing the approaching danger. Chapter 287, Sneak Attack. The next instant, the Thunderbird Thorondor appeared over Bree. Electricity crawled across his ruffled feathers, drawing lightning from the roiling clouds until it condensed into a bolt as thick as a bucket and slammed earthward. For a moment, the city wall blazed as if day had broken. Hair rose on the backs of everyone's necks, skin prickled with static. The bolt skimmed past the defenders and struck the piled wights below. Electric light detonated. Countless wights shattered, their bones turned to ash in an instant. Others were blasted apart, charred black, limbs severed, bodies smoking. The militiamen on the wall, watching how easily Thorondor cut through those dread creatures, stared up at the Thunderbird in awe and reverence. Thorondor did not relent. With each mighty flap, he sucked power from the storm-racked sky and unleashed fresh lightning. Outside the walls, craters formed where bolts struck, and fragments of wights littered the ground. The lightning was pure and merciless. The evil spirits inhabiting the bones had no time to react before they were reduced to ash. As the wights thinned beneath the Thunderbird's onslaught, the men on the wall cheered. Inside the city, panic eased to wonder and gratitude. "Look, the Lord of Weathertop's Thunderbird has come to save us," people cried, their faces alight with relief and pride. Merchants and travelers who had escaped disaster stood slack-jawed, marveling at the bird that bent lightning and weather. It made the mysterious Lord Duir seem even more formidable. But as Thorondor continued his bombardment, a black arrow streaked through the night. It was swift and shrouded in a cold, malevolent aura, aimed straight for the Thunderbird. It was only when the missile was nearly upon him that Thorondor noticed it. There was no time to dodge. A scale-like shield sprang up and took the hit, shunting the arrow aside. It was a magic shield made by Duir from a frost dragon scale and alchemical runes, an automatic defense Thorondor kept hidden. Stung, Thorondor's gaze fixed on the attacker, Adunafel the Quiet, a ringwraith skilled in long-range sorcery and Morgul arrows. Thorondor answered with a concentrated bolt of lightning. The ringwraith, unperturbed, raised his bow, intoned a dark spell, and the ring he wore flared. He loosed a Morgul arrow that collided with the lightning in midair. Dark power met pure thunder, erupting in a deafening explosion and a shockwave that nearly threw the men on the wall off their feet. Thorondor cried out, beat his wings, and the clouds thickened and buckled. Rain began to fall in a torrent, as if the storm were trying to drown the earth. The militiamen and townsfolk huddled for cover, squinting into the downpour. They could do nothing but watch. In the storm, Thorondor thrived. Rain only sharpened his power. He dove into the clouds and merged with them, unleashing his deepest reserves. For a moment, the sky seemed to overflow with lightning. Bolts used the raindrops as conduits and hammered the ringwraith from every direction. Currents cut across the ground beneath his boots, sealing off his escape. Adunafel tried to resist, invoking the dark ring in his hand. The ring of power shielded him. Unless it were broken, he could not be annihilated. Lightning tore his cloak and armor to tatters, but the wraith himself held on behind the ring's protection. Thorondor gathered more fire, poised to press the assault, when a dagger slipped unseen through the rain and sank into the ringwraith's spirit. At the same moment, Duir slipped free of his invisibility cloak. The dagger was one of the Númenórean blades Duir had taken from the Barrow Downs, one of the few weapons forged to bind and wound ringwraiths to disrupt their sorceries. The blade struck true. The ringwraith's spirit convulsed with a high, keening scream and then burst in a blinding explosion that nearly sent Duir flying. When the smoke cleared, the ringwraith had vanished, leaving only a ring of power where it had stood. Duir scooped up the ring with his wand and slipped it into a small mithril box. He glanced at the invisibility cloak in his hand and allowed himself a satisfied smile. Its reputation for evading detection had held. Wearing it, he had moved close enough to strike without the wraith sensing him. He told Thorondor to keep clearing the wights, then apparated to the Barrow Downs to take stock. There he scouted the scene and frowned. The Witch King of Angmar was the true commander behind the wights. Duir had come intending to confront that power, but instead he had found Adunafel alone and no sign of the Witch King. It put him on edge, though he could not leave the ringwraith alive. Killing Adunafel would alert others. The remaining ringwraiths would soon sense something was wrong. A sudden chill of premonition seized Duir. He turned his head eastward. Is something happening with Gollum? He thought, and without another word, he vanished. North of Weathertop, among the hills, Gollum had been living in hiding. Men searched for him, and darker watchers had kept him under unseen surveillance. Though the ring made him invisible at times, he had been hunted and frightened. He had slipped through a few narrow escapes and finally found a cave in the hill woods to shelter in. He did not flee farther away. He still hoped for the One Ring. The golden ring he clutched looked identical to the One Ring. He knew that the black-robed wizard must have seen the real thing to be able to conjure such a twin. Either the One Ring was in the wizard's hands or the wizard knew its whereabouts. The thought of the wizard's cruelty made Smeagol tremble. The mere memory of torture made his body flinch. But the longing for his precious always won out. He felt, in a way he could not name, that the real ring was nearby, and he would not leave until he found it. He murmured to the ring in his hand, my precious, yet he would periodically wrench himself out of that fascination, disgust warring with desire. The golden imitation, despite granting invisibility, was to him like a pebble or a weed. But when he glanced at the mark on his arm, the two trees mark, fear returned. He dared not discard the ring entirely. He had tried to remove the mark by many means. None worked. Once he had even thought of cutting off his arm, but the mark seemed to shift, moving to his chest or other places when he attempted it. He had given up the idea. Smeagol was cowed and terrified of Duir. He would not resist overtly. Gollum, the darker side, however, resented and plotted. He would submit only as far as it served his ends, always poised to turn on his new masters when the chance came. Duir knew this, and though he mistrusted Gollum's nature, he kept the creature alive because Gollum still had uses. As Gollum brooded in his cave, clutching the fake ring and thinking of the One Ring, the mouth of his shelter was blown open by a tremendous force. He nearly dropped the ring. Standing in the entrance was Saruman, who had tracked him down. The white wizard peered into the cave with a contemptuous sneer. "Gollum," he called. "I know you're in there. Hand over the ring, nicely." Gollum's face went pale with terror. He shoved the ring onto his finger and vanished. Chapter 287. Trap Gollum tried to escape by turning invisible, but Saruman was no ordinary human. He activated his staff, releasing an aura of detection magic that revealed everything around him, nowhere to hide. In an instant, the invisible Gollum was locked onto. Saruman's gaze fixed on him, and he sent a ball of scorching fire toward the spot, his voice cold and threatening. "If you don't want to be burned to ashes, show yourself." Terrified of death, Gollum took off the one ring and revealed himself. The sight of the ring made Saruman's expression greedy. "Give me the one ring." Gollum hesitated then. Seeing Saruman's murderous intent, he trembled and handed it over. Saruman snatched it without a second's hesitation. "The one ring, finally in my hands." He was ecstatic, his face alight with feverish triumph as if he had already imagined his dominion. But that ecstasy vanished the next instant. Saruman frowned, examined the ring more closely, and his face went dark. "Fake! This is fake!" He flung the ring to the ground, seized Gollum by the throat, and lifted him. "Where is the real One Ring? Where is it? Tell me." Gollum choked and could barely breathe. He flailed and croaked, "I don't know. I don't have the One Ring." Saruman refused to accept it. "You're lying. Tell me, or I'll make death a mercy." Gollum, who truly did not possess the ring, could only struggle and beg for mercy, insisting he didn't know. Saruman sneered, "Then explain this ring in your hand. Why is it identical to the One Ring? That was given to me by the black-robed wizard. He caught me, tortured me, then gave me this ring and told me to use it to lure others." Gollum blurted, betraying Duir without hesitation. Satisfied that Gollum showed no sign of deceit, Saruman threw him to the ground in disgust. "Duir?" Saruman's gaze turned south toward Weathertop, sharp and intent. If he can make a ring identical to the One Ring, he must have seen the real One Ring, or perhaps he has it himself. Gollum collapsed, pale and gasping. He noticed the golden ring Saruman had thrown to the ground and went to pick it up, drawn to faint inscriptions on its inner band. He could not read the letters and tilted his head in puzzlement. Saruman, noticing his movement, demanded, "What are you doing?" Gollum, trembling, held the ring out and said, "Text." Gollum doesn't know what it says. Saruman snatched it back and peered at the inner inscription. It was Elvish, written in Tengwar. He read aloud, puzzled, "He who wears this ring, call my name, and I shall appear." At that instant, Gollum spat out two words, "Black-robed wizard Duir." Saruman looked toward Gollum in confusion, but the ring in his hand seemed to respond. It vibrated, a blue light gathering around it. No. Saruman had a bad premonition and tried to throw the ring away. The ring clung to his hand as if glued, and before he could pull free, it vanished, taking him with it. Gollum's face split into a sinister, triumphant grin. He stole a cautious look around, then slipped away quickly. Hogwarts Castle, top floor of Onslow Tower. Saruman reappeared from nowhere. Before he could react, a spell struck him. Expelliarmus! His staff was wrenched from his grasp and caught by Duir. "Long time no see, Saruman." Duir smiled. "I didn't expect you to visit. What an honor to host you." "Saruman!" His face black with fury, Saruman realized he had been baited. Gollum had been the lure. The One Ring had clouded his judgment and drawn him straight into Duir's trap. Duir, for his part, was delighted. Gollum had been nothing more than a chess piece to draw out the hidden player, and the catch was a far bigger one than he'd hoped. Saruman had lost his staff, but refused to show weakness. He raised his hand and revealed a ring set with angular, crystal-like facets. A dwarven ring. Duir's eyes widened, then curled into a mocking grin. "Sauron is generous to grant you one of the last 3 of the 7 dwarven rings." Saruman snorted. "You think this will stop me? Duir, bringing me here was your greatest mistake. Hand over the One Ring now. Don't try to lie. I know you have it." Duir spread his hands. "You're wrong. I don't have the One Ring. I wouldn't want it if I could get it. I don't understand why you're so obsessed with that thing." Saruman's eyes ice over. "You're lying. Even if it's not on your person, you know where it is." "Tell me where the One Ring is," Saruman warned, "or I'll show you what a head of the wizards can do." He activated the dwarven ring and began to chant, preparing to crush Duir, but his spell sputtered and died. The dwarven ring's power seemed blunted. The great fireball he summoned shrank to a mere spark and fizzled before it left his hand. Saruman's face drained of color. What? What's happening? He tried again, but his magic failed him. Duir watched Saruman's confusion with a faint, satisfied chuckle. He tapped the floor with his staff. Saruman, look around. Every surface of the room, floor, walls, and ceiling, was covered with runes etched in mithril. The runes formed a dense lattice designed to suppress magic, an anti-magic field that rendered every spell powerless except to Duir. This hidden chamber had been prepared long ago with Gandalf's guidance, a contingency for precisely such a day. While Saruman was thrown into panic, Duir did not hesitate. He raised his staff, and voice calm and final, said the words that killed. Avada Kedavra, Chapter 289, Saruman's Death. A blinding bolt of magic slammed into Saruman. His face screwed up in terror as a howl of pain tore from him. His body went limp, and he crumpled to the stone floor. Duir frowned. The killing curse, by its nature, ripped a soul from a body and killed instantly. But where it would fell ordinary beings in an instant, it could not finish a Maya like Saruman, whose spirit was far stronger. Duir judged that it would take dozens of killing curses to destroy Saruman completely, and each cast demanded that the caster pour forth the deepest, blackest malice. To fire that many spells in succession would likely drive Duir mad from his own hatred long before Saruman finally fell. If the killing curse was unreliable, there were other means. Duir called up Fiendfire. The foul flames sprang to life and raced through the tower, filling the chamber, swallowing air and light. The fire treated Duir and Saruman differently. Around Duir, it seemed cold and insubstantial, not singeing a hair, but around Saruman, it burned like an elemental scourge. With his power curtailed, Saruman struggled to weave defenses, his resistance broken. Within seconds, the Fiendfire devoured him. His shrieks echoed as his flesh was reduced to ash. The dwarven ring slipped from his finger and rolled among the embers. The Fiendfire licked at it, but even such hellfire could not destroy a ring of power quickly. Duir stood back and watched until the blaze died. For a moment, he allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. He had changed the course of events. He had taken Saruman out early. Without Saruman to scheme for Isengard and to serve Sauron, the Dark Lord was weakened. But as Duir prepared to claim his prize, ash stirred. A gray mist coalesced from the smoking heap, lifting and weaving until it took shape, a pale, spectral Saruman. It was more substantial than a mere ghost, yet not wholly flesh. He fixed Duir with a gaze full of bitter hatred. "Duir," he hissed, "do you think burning my body can truly kill me? Mark my words, one day I will return, and I will have my vengeance." Without waiting for reply, Saruman shot through the far wall like a streak of gray-white light and fled west. The streak cut across the sky like a dark meteor. Elrond in Rivendell, Glorfindel, and Galadriel in Lothlorien looked up in surprise. Other wizards felt the disturbance too and readied themselves. From within Amansul, Duir watched the spirit vanish, his face hardening. Maiar were not easy to imprison. He had no way to bind a soul. Saruman's escape added an unwelcome variable. Still, destroying his body was no small thing. At least Saruman would be quieter for a while, and Isengard would be safe from his ambitions. Duir snuffed the last of the Fiendfire and swept the ashes aside with a scouring charm. The dwarven ring lay among the coals. One of the 7 dwarven rings, it was one of only 3 that remained. Unlike other rings of power, the dwarven rings amplified wealth, coin traded for coin, gems for greater gems. For its wearer, it was like a hidden luck in matters of treasure, which is why Dwarrofolk leaders amassed such hoards and why dragons coveted their halls. 4 of the 7 rings had been destroyed or consumed by dragon fire. The remaining 3 had eventually fallen into Sauron's hands. Sauron had steeped these rings with dark will, meant to gnaw at desire and to corrupt. Dwarves, by nature stubborn and resistant, had not fallen fully to ring wraithhood, but the rings still twisted them in quieter ways. Duir felt no tug of greed. His coffers were vast already. He possessed a philosopher's stone that could transmute metal into gold at will, powered by magic rather than commerce. The dwarven ring also carried Sauron's taint, dangerous to any non-dwarf who handled it. Duir picked it up with his wand and slipped it into the mithril box that already contained the human ring. He allowed himself a small, merciless smile. He had bested Saruman, broken a ring wraith, and taken 2 rings of power. Sauron would be enraged and bereft. Mordor swelled with a terrible pressure. From the top of Barad-dûr, the great fiery eye burned with wrath. Duir! Sauron's voice rolled through the tower like thunder, filling every crevice with dread. The dark presence made all the creatures of Mordor tremble. Within the inner chamber, Sauron turned his baleful gaze on Saruman's spirit. "Saruman," he said coldly, "tell me why you were in the West, why you lost a ring of power, and why your body was destroyed by Duir." Saruman's spirit quivered. "I, my lord," he stammered, "I thought it unsafe to let Gollum keep searching for the One Ring. I went to the West to see and to aid you in finding it." Sauron's laughter was like a cracking blade. "Is that so? Or did you mean to seize the ring for yourself?" Darkness pooled and swelled around the Dark Lord. The tower thrummed with malignant power as Sauron's will reached into Saruman's soul. "Traitors will know no peace," Sauron intoned. "Even death will not free them. You have lost a servant. You will take his place and be the greatest of my ringwraiths." The blackness reached for Saruman. The corruption was not mere words, but an assault that clawed at his spirit. "No, Sauron, you cannot," Saruman cried. Desperation stripped his arrogance away. "I will serve you. I will build strong walls and armies. Spare me. I swear myself to you." Sauron's answer was a sneer. "Made a ringwraith, you would serve me still, and with less will of your own. In truth, I should thank Duir for burning your body. It gives me the chance to bind you wholly. I will have my revenge on Duir. One day you will help me see it done." The dark aura coalesced into a monstrous demonic eye that fixed upon Saruman. Its vertical pupil devoured light itself and plunged deep into him. Though Saruman was Maya-born and fierce, the shadow worked slowly. He would not be forced to obedience in an instant. Watching the west, Sauron drew his spies. He ordered his ringwraiths, hunting in Eriador, to return. "Duir," he murmured into the void, "there will be time yet. We have ages to play with. Next time, it will be my turn." Chapter 290. Merry Dewey entered the cellar. The vast space, expanded many times over by the undetectable extension charm, was as large as several football fields. Inside, treasures piled up like mountains, gleaming under the dim light. Nestled among the gold and jewels, the dragon Smaug lay sleeping. At Dewey's arrival, the dragon, roused from a long slumber, opened his eyes. He rose from the golden heap, and as countless treasures slid from his scales, coins and gems clattered to the floor. Smaug was larger than he had been a year before. Where he had once measured a little over 100 meters, he had now doubled in size, well over 200 meters, perhaps approaching 300. His aura was stronger, too. "Master, why have you come?" Smaug asked, puzzled. Then his expression shifted to one of eager flattery. "Are you going to entrust the Philosopher's Stone to me for safekeeping?" Dewey rolled his eyes. Entrusting the Philosopher's Stone to a greedy dragon would be like handing a meat bun to a dog, never to be seen again. He didn't waste words. He produced the mithril box and opened it to reveal the dwarf rings and human rings inside. "What are these?" Smaug peered over curiously. "Some of Sauron's rings of power," Dewey said. "You've already absorbed the Frost Dragon's crystal, so your breath should be hotter. Can you destroy these?" Smaug puffed up with pride. "Although I only absorbed part of the Frost Dragon's power, my flame is 2 to 3 times hotter than before, far stronger than most dragons. Only ancient dragons might match me. Other dragons can destroy rings of power, so of course I can now." Dewey handed over the box. "Then destroy these two." "No problem." Smaug thumped his chest and swallowed the 2 rings. His chest swelled with a furious heat, as if a dragon-shaped furnace had been lit within him. The flame incinerated the rings until they began to melt, and finally, with 2 violent internal explosions, they were obliterated. Smaug burped contentedly and exhaled a plume of black smoke that carried an unpleasant aura. The smoke quickly dissipated on the breeze. "With treats like that, just give them to me next time," Smaug said, satisfied. "Those rings contained a lot of power. Even corrupted, they're useful. Helped me absorb the dragon crystals faster." Dewey was surprised, and then relieved. The rings were useless to him. If Smaug could gain from them, so much the better. By nature, dragons were difficult to corrupt further. The One Ring and other rings of power had little effect on beings already inclined toward greed and malice. Dragons were obsessed with treasure, not dominion, and the allure of power meant less to them than a pile of gold. That was why, when Smaug discovered Bilbo with a ring in the Lonely Mountain, he had no interest in seizing it unless it was for its gold. Dewey had never quite understood a dragon's logic. Jewels and coins could neither be eaten nor used, yet Smaug treasured them as if they were part of his body. He hoarded wealth with a hunger that stretched even to the Philosopher's Stone, which could turn stone to gold. Its presence always set Smaug's eyes ablaze. After disposing of the rings, Dewey left the cellar and returned to the castle. Far away in Mordor, Sauron sensed the destruction. The ringwraiths that had recently been restored by his eye screamed and dissipated when their rings were destroyed. Of the original 9, only 7 remained. Instead of erupting in fury, Sauron's dark, cold gaze turned westward, and he concentrated his efforts on corrupting Saruman, intending to make him the mightiest pawn, something like a ringwraith. Time passed swiftly until September 21st, 2948. It was the harvest festival of Middle-earth and Dewey's wedding day. Weathertop Hogwarts Castle was decked out in banners and flowers. Stewards, attendants, guards, and servants bustled about with smiles. The paths and courtyards were carpeted with spider silk red rugs. Every brick, floor, suit of armor, and statue gleamed. Servants polished the paintings carefully, occasionally scolded by portraits who complained of having a layer of skin scrubbed off. Even the inhabitants of frames were in a festive mood. Duir and Arwen, painted on canvas, had already held a wedding of their own, ahead of the ceremony in real life. In one particular painting, all the portrait people gathered in the garden to celebrate. Outside, the castle was even livelier. The road from the mountain to the castle flowed with people. Dewey had invited all his subjects to witness the wedding, and Hogsmeade and Bree turned out as if for a major holiday. Bree's residents had set out a day early in a grand procession to ensure they arrived on time. The city itself was nearly empty. Had an enemy chosen to strike then, Bree would have been vulnerable. But few would risk it. Not long ago, thousands of ghouls had attacked, and before they could breach the walls, they were annihilated by Lord Dewey's Thunderbirds. The sight of lightning bolts striking down the horde became an unforgettable tale for Bree's people, spread by merchants and travelers, and even set to song by bards, praising the Thunderbirds' majestic command of the storm. Hogsmeade's residents did not need to depart a day early, but they hung lanterns and streamers, donned fine clothes, and eagerly made their way to the castle. Despite Dewey's request that no gifts be brought, people came bearing homegrown fruit, freshly baked bread, and other delicacies, the scent of food trailing along the roads. Tens of thousands arrived between the two towns, and the castle easily accommodated them all. Inside, the visitors gaped in wonder. They admired the lofty halls, the twin golden and silver trees in the garden, and the seemingly endless shower of petals drifting from nowhere. The animated armors stood like silent sentinels, their spears festooned with flowers. They would even offer blossoms to passing children. In the great fountain, sprays of water formed tiny merfolk who danced joyfully, drawing delighted gasps from leaning children, much to the chiding of their parents. At the fountain's center, a golden statue of Smaug, displeased that the merfolk stole attention from him, beat its gilded wings and spat out a shower of gold coins. People rushed to snatch them, only to find the coins fading away, clearly fakes. Nearby, statues of dwarves, elves, and humans had been arranged like a choir, their melodies drifting through the entire castle, lending the celebration an air of pure, jubilant mirth. Chapter 291. The Elves Arrive. Inside the banquet hall, the important guests had gathered. Alongside Gandalf and Bilbo were Legolas, who had come with a retinue and gifts on behalf of King Thranduil. King Thorin Oakenshield of the Lonely Mountain had sent his heir Fili and other dwarves. Lord Balin of Moria had come in person. Lord Bard of Dale and Lord Beorn of the Anduin River Valley were present as well. From the Shire came, besides Bilbo, Drogo Baggins, Frodo's father, the Brandybuck chieftain of Buckland, the Took family head, the mayor of the Shire, and many other hobbits. From the far east, the blue wizard Morinetar had arrived, bearing his lord's gift. Remestamo remained behind to guard the eastern marches. The elven lord of Dorwinion from the Sea of Rune had also come in person. On behalf of the regent of Gondor, Denethor Seketh attended to offer his congratulations. Elsewhere in the hall, King Thengel of Rohan and other lords watched and conversed. The atmosphere inside the hall was lively. Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and Mornetar sat together, smoking pipes and discussing the state of Middle-earth. The dwarves clustered for drinking contests, their boisterous laughter often rolling across the room and drawing amused glances. The hobbits gathered modestly, eyes wide as they took in the decorations and the assembled races. Bilbo was at ease as ever, mingling and introducing the younger hobbits to familiar faces among the dwarves and elves, helping keep the evening moving. The groom, Duir, moved through the crowd with a practiced cheerfulness, greeting every arrival. Denethor II, who had ventured to attend on behalf of Gondor's regency, looked around as if in a dream. The banquet hall itself seemed enchanted. Moving portraits on the walls celebrated along with the guests and could be addressed by passers-by. One painted reveler had even accepted a dwarf's challenge to a drinking contest and promptly gotten himself drunk, to the immense delight of the real dwarves. The dome of the hall dissolved into drifting pink cloud, sending down showers of gold-flecked rain and red petals. Bas-reliefs along the walls gave birth to a troop of cherubic-winged children who fluttered out and filled the air with tender song, blowing long horns and plucking tiny harps. They were charming but quick-tempered. When some dwarves jeered at their music, the little ones swooped down and bonked the offenders on the heads with their instruments. The hall erupted in laughter. Denethor was especially startled by the food. A steward had explained that the banquet included meat from 10 dragons. The steak on his plate, he was told, was dragon. Having seen the terror and might of dragons before, he could scarcely believe they were served as fare. He tasted the dragon steak eagerly. It warmed him through, and his face flushed with the pleasure of a strong draught. As sunset approached, everyone waited for the bride. At last she arrived from the east. Thunderbird Zorando led the approach, a magnificent flying carriage drawn by 12 winged horses sweeping toward the castle. Dozens more winged horses flanked the carriage, each bearing elven knights who carried silver-white banners. Behind them rode 12 warriors from the Black Land on great hippogriffs who had gone out to meet their retinue. The castle gates opened, and the citizens spilled out to welcome them. People craned their necks to watch the winged horses and the elves who rode them. The folk of Hogsmeade and Bree were particularly excited. Pride shone on their faces at the thought that their future lady, the bride, was an elven princess of such beauty and nobility. The Thunderbird circled once above the castle, cried clearly, and released a globe of blue lightning into the sky. It burst like fireworks, scattering electric sparks that astonished all who watched. Having fulfilled its part, the great bird returned to its nest. The carriage descended and landed outside the gate, then proceeded down the white avenue toward the main building. Citizens lining the road cheered and tossed flowers. The elven knights held their positions around the carriage, but did not discourage the joyful showering of petals. The procession stopped at the entrance to the banquet hall beneath a canopy of blossoms. 2 elven captains in exquisite robes and silver circlets rode forward, Eladon and Elrohir, Arwen's elder brothers. Duir stepped out to meet them, embracing each warmly. "I'm so glad you're both here," he said. "Today is Arwen's wedding," Eladon answered with a composed smile. "Of course we had to escort her. She is our only sister." The carriage doors opened. First to step out were the Lord and Lady of Lothlorien, Celeborn and Galadriel. At the first glimpse of Galadriel, the crowd fell silent. Her sacred radiance and queenly presence made it difficult to look upon her directly. Even the dwarves, who often quarreled with elves, could not help but be moved by her grace. Next came Glorfindel, all golden light and noble bearing. One by one, dozens of elves emerged, relatives and kin of Arwen, Noldor, Sindar, and Teleri among them. Finally, Elrond appeared arm in arm with Arwen. He wore a formal blue robe and a circlet of silver, looking every inch a wise and gentle lord. Arwen walked beside him like a living constellation. A white elven gown, embroidered with delicate patterns and set with countless jewels, clung to her like starlight. Her eyes found Duir's, and she smiled, gentle, bright, and full of starlight. Chapter 292, The Ring of the Resurrection Stone, Hogwarts Castle, in the garden beneath the twin golden malong tree and the silver white tree. The garden was a riot of blossoms. Vines had woven themselves into tall arches, and flowers constantly shed sparks of colorful pollen. Every plant swayed to a gentle music. The golden malong and the silver-white tree, as if celebrating the newlyweds, bloomed out of season with lush flowers that gave off a faint light, like sunlight spun of gold and moonlight braided with silver, showering everyone below. Petals hung in the air, drifting and twirling like silk, gliding through the guests or coalescing into tiny flower sprites that fluttered above and scattered petals toward the couple. A sweet scent drifted through the garden, refreshing the spirit and subtly easing fatigue and hidden ailments. Beneath the twin trunks, a branch from each tree reached out and intertwined to form a gilded arch from which light silk curtains hung. Dewey stood under the arch, crowned with the shining circlet of wisdom, dressed in a magnificent silver-white robe trimmed with gold and wearing the Evenstar necklace at his chest. Elrond, holding Arwen's arm, walked toward him under the sound of music, placed Arwen's hand solemnly into Dewey's, and stepped aside. Gandalf, beaming as though he had never been happier, stood on the dais to officiate. His voice rang like a bell and reached every ear. He called for the witness of Varda, Queen of the Stars, and Manwë, King of the Valar. Varda, who had set the stars in the heavens so that the first sight the elves beheld upon awakening was the sky, was revered above all. As if answering Gandalf's invocation, the stars brightened, and 3 giant eagles came from the east to circle above the castle. A hush and then murmur of astonishment ran through the crowd. Gandalf's surprise softened into a deeper smile. During the ceremony, Dewey and Arwen each removed their silver engagement rings and exchanged gold bands. The ring Dewey gave Arwen was a delicate double-banded gold ring, one band like dew, the other engraved with stars entwined. He had reforged it from Saruman's Ring of Power, guided by the memory of Celebrimbor's soul. The new ring retained power-amplifying properties and had been crafted to bring small good fortunes to its wearer. Inspired in part by the idea of Felix Felicis, it was, in effect, a ring of luck. It could not ward off great calamity, but it could smooth life's minor edges, and it was the first truly meaningful ring of power Dewey had ever forged. The instant he slid the new ring onto Arwen's finger, a golden blossom fell from the Malong tree and settled in her hair as if placed there by a lover's hand, lending her a touch of nobility. At the same moment, a silver fruit dropped from the white tree into Arwen's palm. She looked at it. Its skin gleamed like pure silver, and laughed with surprise before tucking it away. Then she placed the ring she had prepared on Dewey's right index finger. Dewey felt the ring's weight and saw at once its simple elven design, a plain band set with a black stone. It was the Resurrection Stone, one of Arwen's betrothal gifts. The moment he wore it, he felt a shift. Previously, the Resurrection Stone would only summon the souls of those with whom its wielder had an emotional tie. Dewey had once summoned Celebrimbor by acquiring memories and feelings from Lady Galadriel and grafting them onto himself with memory magic, an elaborate, risky process that could fracture the mind and invite splits like golems. Now, combined into a ring, the Resurrection Stone's restrictions had been removed. He could call any departed soul he wished. He could see the netherworld and its denizens, and he could pass into that realm through the ring. Seeing his astonished delight, Arwen smiled. "My grandmother forged this herself," she said. "She combined the Resurrection Stone with the ring to strengthen its powers. I contributed a little to the design." Dewey remembered then that Lady Galadriel was Noldor, kin of Fëanor. The Noldor were famed craftsmen, and as a Noldor princess, Galadriel's skill was unsurprising. With the rings exchanged and vows spoken, Gandalf declared them husband and wife. Applause and cheers erupted. Brilliant magical fireworks shot into the sky and burst in cascades of color. Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, Glorfindel, and other elves smiled down on the couple, their faces full of blessing. Amid the celebration, Dewey slipped his arm around Arwen's waist and kissed her deeply. "Arwen, you are finally mine," he murmured, heart full. Arwen's face shone. She returned his look with equal love. "Yes," she whispered, "I am yours, and we will be together forever." For a moment, Dewey's desire flared at the sight of her smile, but he tempered it, laced his fingers with hers, and they turned to accept the crowd's adoration. They descended the dais and walked along the red carpet toward the castle's great banquet hall. people of Hogsmeade and Bree fell open like a river on either side, bowing and kneeling in reverence. From this day forward, Duir had another lady. Whispers arose among the folk of hopes for children to come. Dewey and Arwen acknowledged the crowd with gentle nods, pleased by the townfolk's simple warmth. Inside the castle, they were greeted by portraits that voiced their congratulations, and the couple exchanged greetings with their own painted likenesses. The wedding feast lasted 3 days and 3 nights before the guests began to depart. Hogsmeade and Bree's residents descended the mountain in groups and returned to their lives, but the memory of the dreamlike wedding would linger for years, perhaps forever. Dewey's other invitees left via the Flu network or the one-time port keys he had arranged. Denethor Sect, regent of Gondor, praised the Flu network and pressed Dewey to visit the capital, asking that the network be extended to Gondor. Dewey, having not yet made his formal visit to the capital, accepted the invitation and promised to come when he could. Last to leave were the Elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien. Elrond and Galadriel declined Dewey's offer to stay. Some mounted flying steeds and rode away. Others departed for Rivendell and Lothlorien through the fireplaces. The garden slowly settled back into peace, the twin trees' unusual blossoms fading, while the castle and its people carried the glow of the wedding forward into the days to come. Chapter 293. Travel Dewey had originally given 6 Pegasi as gifts to Elrond, Eladon, Elror, Galadriel, Celeborn, and Arwen. The elves adored the creatures and set aside their best studs and mares to mate with them. The experiment exceeded expectations. When a Pegasus was bred with a normal steed, there was roughly a 50% chance the foal would inherit wings. In short order, they had produced some 50 Pegasi and continued to breed more, even turning their attention to the 12 hybrid Pegasi Dewey had himself raised. For the year after the engagement, almost all of those animals stayed in Rivendell under elvish care, each forming its own harem. Dewey sometimes fretted that his herd might be drained dry. It would be humiliating if they could no longer pull his flying carriage. After the last of the guests, Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, and the rest departed, only Dewey and Arwen remained in the castle. With outsiders gone, Dewey relaxed completely. He wasted no time. With a startled little cry from Arwen, he swept his bride into his arms and hurried her to their chamber, closing the door behind them. In the days before, with Arwen's elders about, Dewey had been more cautious. His brothers-in-law, Legolas, Balin the dwarf, and others had egged him on and forced him to drink. The wine was Dorwinian's stout vintage, the kind of strong stuff that even King Thranduil would feel the effects of. Bilbo had even contributed a cup. When the elders left, Dewey had made a token show of asking them to stay, while inwardly cheering. They stayed in the castle for a month, enjoying each other's company, before reluctantly reappearing in public. The household, the butler Edward, and a retinue of attendants and servants, welcomed their new mistress with unalloyed delight. Arwen's beauty and grace enchanted everyone who met her. Servants took to calling her Lady of the Manor, Lady Arwen, or simply Lady Evenstar. Dewey left the management of the castle to her and took Arwen down into the treasury beneath the stronghold. There she met Smaug and saw the dragon's hoard. Dewey handed her the key. Smaug, mindful of his master's new bride, fawned over her and, to Dewey's surprise, chose the finest gem in his pile and presented it to Arwen. Dewey raised an eyebrow. It was the most generous he had ever seen the stingy dragon be, and it made him look at Smaug in a new light. With the castle's affairs entrusted to Arwen, Dewey declared it time for their honeymoon. To make their travels modest, at Arwen's suggestion, he transformed the magnificent golden flying carriage into a simple, elegant wooden carriage and chose a single Pegasus, its wings carefully concealed. With 1 horse and 1 carriage, they set off down the mountain toward Hogsmeade. To avoid drawing attention in the village, Dewey cast an invisibility spell over themselves and the carriage, and they slipped into Hogsmeade unseen. The village was alive with bustle, narrow streets full of people, shop fronts, hawkers calling out wares, bargaining, and the laughter of children. Travelers, merchants, and bards drifted among the locals. The wedding a month earlier was still the talk of the town. Townsfolk recounted the tale with pride and the occasional envious flourish. Arwen, sitting in the carriage, watched the bustle with wide-eyed interest. It was a different scene from the quiet of Rivendell and the serene forests of Lothlorien where she had grown up. It pulsed with life and warmth. Being half-elven, she felt human impulses more keenly than many elves. Curiosity, delight in small things, a warmth that kept her from the aloofness of pure elvenkind. Dewey took her from the carriage and they walked the streets together. Hidden by the spell, they were invisible to passers-by. If anyone imagined them at all, it would be only as an ordinary, forgettable couple. They drifted through market stalls. Arwen lingered over human handicrafts, finding beauty even where the workmanship was less delicate than elvish art. Dewey accompanied her, paying and carrying purchases. He had taken a sizable handful of gold from Smaug and kept a spatial bag for overflow they could buy freely. If Arwen admired an item a moment too long, Dewey would snap his fingers and buy it without hesitation. After some shopping, they stopped at the lake to watch a painter and purchased a fresh landscape. In the square, they lingered for street performances, jugglers, acrobats, and performers who breathed fire and swallowed swords. Arwen laughed in delight. The act seemed more wondrous to her than any wizardry, and Dewey rewarded those who pleased her with coins. The performer's gratitude was effusive and nearly undid the invisibility charm with the noise and attention. Later they found themselves in the Hogsmeade branch of the Leaping Horse Inn, run by Butterbur's son. The tavern was the liveliest in town. In a corner by the hearth, a bard plucked his harp and sang a ballad of Dewey's taming of the great dragon. The locals, Dewey's subjects in spirit, listened spellbound as the tale unfolded. The dangerous moments drew worried gasps, the triumphs loud cheers. Dewey smiled at the bard's dramatics. The storyteller had a knack for turning events into legend, and in comparison his own memory of subduing Smaug seemed almost prosaic. He glanced at Arwen, who listened with equal pleasure, and found her fascination endearing. After a day in Hogsmeade, their carts laden with purchases, Dewey and Arwen climbed back into the carriage. They set the Pegasus' wings visibly hidden and, escorted by the quiet of the road, headed west along the Great East Road, the next stage of their journey ahead. Chapter 294. Heading west, Dewey and Arwen's carriage traveled west along the main road. They stayed in Bree for 2 days and met with Lucky, the town's mayor. After the previous siege of Bree by whites and the failure to summon help in time, Dewey had a flue network installed on several public hearths in the town, including the municipal building. These were linked to fireplaces in Hogsmeade and at Hogwarts Castle, so they could serve as emergency contact channels. Unlike Hogsmeade, which prospered through tourism and its proximity to Hogwarts, Bree was a trading hub. Goods from all over Middle-earth passed through, from the wines of Dorwinion in the far east to the horses of Rohan and the weapons and armor of Gondor. Leaving Bree, they continued west. They stopped briefly at the Barrow Downs, where Dewey unleashed Fiendfire and reduced the tomb's lingering remains to ash, an effort to prevent the Witch King of Angmar from ever again defiling the sleepers with dark arts. Pressing on, they passed the Old Forest. The Pegasus that had been walking at the carriage's side spread its great wings, and with a single graceful lift began to fly south, skimming the treetops. Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, who dwelt in the Old Forest, seemed to have known of their coming in advance. They welcomed the travelers warmly and had prepared a sumptuous dinner. Arwen and Goldberry took an instant liking to one another, and Dewey spoke at length with Tom about the One Ring. Sauron, having failed to find the ring before, would not give up. He would continue to search in secret. Dewey felt guilty that he had suggested Tom be its guardian in the first place. Even if Sauron could not wrest the ring from Tom, having his reclusive life repeatedly disturbed would be a burden. Tom laughed the concern away. If he did not wish to be found, no one would find him. The Old Forest itself was a natural defense. The horns would block any who wished to enter, making it difficult even for ringwraiths to cross. After a few days with Tom and Goldberry, Dewey and Arwen traveled down the Withywindle River and rounded to Buckland on the west side of the Old Forest. They visited Drogo Baggins, who had married the daughter of the Brandybuck chieftain. There was no telling when the future Frodo would be born. From there, they went on to see the Brandybucks. They spent only one night in Buckland, and then Dewey and Arwen walked north along the Brandywine River to rejoin the east-west road. Crossing the Brandywine Bridge, they passed through several hobbit villages and finally arrived at Hobbiton. They wound along the road toward Hobbit Hill, breathing in the peaceful countryside. Neat green grass, wildflowers, and short, friendly-looking trees lined the hills. Smalls were dug into the slopes like rabbit holes, their round doors and windows painted in bright natural colors, so charming that the place seemed a fairy tale kingdom. "I really like it here," Arwen said, smiling as she took in the view. Dewey put an arm around her waist. "Me too. It's a pure land. When I first woke up, I was here. Bilbo took me in and fed me. Otherwise, I might have wandered the world hungry." He told Arwen about his time living in Bag End. The carriage stopped at the small courtyard outside Bag End, where Bilbo sat in the sun, reading a newspaper and smoking his pipe. He was immediately taken by the tall white steed pulling the carriage, a taller, more slender horse than he had ever seen, its coat so white it seemed to float light off the sunlight. Bilbo blinked at the driverless-looking carriage. When the door opened and Dewey and Arwen stepped out, his face brightened. "Dewey or Arwen?" He set down his paper and pipe and hurried over. Dewey helped Arwen down, then leaned in to hug Bilbo. "Arwen and I are on our honeymoon and happened to pass through the Shire. May we come in?" "Of course. You're very welcome." Bilbo beamed and dragged them inside. At the doorway, he grinned and warned Arwen, "Mind the lintel. It's not very tall." Duir and Gandalf both bumped their heads here. Arwen glanced at her husband as he ducked slightly and laughed. Inside Bag End, Dewey quickly used his magic to raise the ceiling, otherwise his 2-meter height would be rather uncomfortable. Bilbo was thrilled by their visit and nearly emptied his pantry to set a feast before them. He even offered to run to the market for fresh produce until Dewey gently forbade it. They stayed 3 days at Bilbo's insistence, wandering Hobbiton and the surrounding countryside. When the reluctant farewells were done, they resumed their journey west. They passed through the Shire's chief town of Michel Delving for a short stop, then left the Shire behind. At last, they reached the end of the east-west road, the Grey Havens. Círdan, having just sent a group of elves over the sea, greeted them warmly. Arwen stared in wonder at the steamships moored in the Gulf of Lune. The sight, smoke, and steam paired with elven craft astonished her, and it surprised Dewey as well. Círdan's work on steam navigation had leapt forward in only a few years. Ocean-going vessels now used steam engines for fast travel, independent of wind or manpower. In their boilers, elves burned an unquenchable magical flame. With water continually added, the engines produced steady power. The Teleri, masters of the sea, sailed further than before. Since Aman, the Undying Lands, had been taken beyond the world by Ilúvatar, the only way to reach it was by the straight road. Otherwise, sailing west on the round world would only bring you back where you started. Beyond Middle-earth, there were also legends of distant continents. The Land of the Sun, a far eastern continent across the Great Sea that corresponded to Aman in the west and lay beyond the East Sea. And the Land of Darkness, a strange land said to have been formed when Middle-earth split in the War of Wrath, lying to the southeast, its nature largely unknown, existing more in rumor than in fact.